Hey everyone! Tonight we are stepping out of our air-conditioned lives and back into a world where the sun was on just a celestial body, but a vengeful god. Imagine, if you will, that you've just stepped off a wooden galley onto the sun-bleached shores of the Levant. You are draped in nearly 80 pounds of quilted gambeson chainmail and polished steel plates, and within 5 minutes, you realize you have made a catastrophic mistake. The air doesn't just feel hot, it feels heavy, like a physical weight pressing against your lungs, and every breath you take tastes like dry copper and toasted dust. You're a noble knight of Europe, a man of iron and faith, but the landscape in front of you doesn't care about your lineage or your heavy cavalry charge. In fact, looking at the shimmering, wobbling horizon, you probably wouldn't survive this, at least, not without the hard-learned lessons we're about to explore. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. If you're listening while you're settling in, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Drop your location and your local time in the comments. I always find it fascinating to see who is awake in the middle of the night across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. As you begin your march away from the coastal spray of Acre, the humidity of the Mediterranean clings to your skin like a wet wool blanket. But as you move inland, that moisture evaporates into a searing dry heat that seems to suck the very life from your pores. You are part of a column of thousands, a glittering serpent of steel winding through a landscape that is increasingly devoid of shade. Your armor, which felt so reassuringly sturdy back in the damp forests of France or the rolling hills of England, is starting to undergo a terrifying transformation. Steel has a high thermal conductivity, and as the sun climbs higher, your breastplate begins to act less like a shield and more like the wall of a wood-fired oven. You can feel the heat radiating inward, passing through the layers of your padded surcoat until your skin is slick with a sweat that has nowhere to go. To your left and right, the horizon isn't a flat line anymore. It's a dancing, liquid thing. This is your first encounter with the inferior Mirage, though you don't have a name for it yet. You see what looks like a shimmering pool of cool blue water just a mile ahead, nestled between two dunes. Your heart leaps, and you can almost taste the moisture. But as the column plods forward, the pool stays exactly the same distance away, mocking you with its glassy surface. You might be a master of the sword, but you're currently being bullied by physics and the refractive index of hot air. Around the edges of your vision, you catch glimpses of movement. They are small, dark shapes that seem to float just above the sand. These are the Bedouin raiders, the desert dwellers who have lived in this kill for generations. To them, you are a slow, overheating crustacean trapped in a metal shell that is slowly cooking its occupant. They don't approach you, they don't charge, they simply watch, drifting through the heaths like ghosts. You try to focus your eyes, but the light is so intense it feels like needles pressing into your pupils. In the medieval world, many believed that these shimmering visions were the work of literal demons or jinns sent to lead the faithful astray. Modern historians, however, still argue whether the Crusaders' frequent reports of supernatural sightings were the result of mass dehydration or a lack of understanding of how light bends through air layers of different temperatures. You reach up to wipe the salt from your eyes, but your metal gauntlet is already too hot to touch your face comfortably. You've noticed that your Arabian guides are dressed in loose, flowing robes of dark wool. At first you thought they were Madwai, wear more layers in the heat, but you're starting to realize the genius of it. Their robes create a chimney effect, a private little microclimate that allows air to circulate and sweat to evaporate efficiently. Meanwhile, you are essentially a giant baked potato wrapped in tinfoil. It's a quirky bit of historical irony that the primitive raiders were using advanced thermodynamics, while the sophisticated Europeans were effectively stewing in their own juices. The Bedouin know exactly how much water a man in your position needs. They know that a horse carrying a fully armored knight will require nearly 30 gallons of water a day just to keep its heart from seizing. They also know that every well along your path has been measured, and if they can delay you by just 2 hours, the math of survival shifts in their favor. They are using the sun as a primary weapon, a siege engine that doesn't require any wood or stone to build. They are waiting for the Goldilocks zone of heat exhaustion, that perfect moment when you are too tired to lift your shield, but still conscious enough to feel the weight of it. You hear a faint, high-pitched trill from the dunes to your east. It's a scouting party. You want to give chase, to end this nagging tension with a glorious charge, but your commander knows better, or at least he thinks he does. If you break formation now, you'll be galloping into a thermal trap. The sand between those dunes is deep and soft, and the temperature there can be 10 degrees higher because the wind is blocked. Your horse would blow its heart out in minutes. So, you keep marching. You keep staring at that fake lake on the horizon, praying that the next mile brings something other than more sun. There is a fringe theory among some tactical historians that the Bedouin actually timed their raids based on the specific angle of the sun to ensure that when the knights looked toward their attackers, they were blinded by the reflection off their own polished shields. It's a nasty, brilliant bit of psychological warfare. You aren't just fighting a person, you are fighting the very atmosphere. Every time you blink, the water on the horizon seems to ripple. And for a split second, you could swear you see a castle made of clouds. It's not a castle, of course, it's just your brain beginning to misfire as your core temperature climbs toward a dangerous 103 degrees. As the first section of your journey into the deep desert concludes, you realize that the heaviest thing you're carrying isn't your sword, it's the heat and the Bedouin. They're just getting started. They've been living in the shimmer for a long time, and they know exactly how to make it hurt. You take a sip from your leather canteen, but the water is lukewarm and tastes like a wet dog. You look at the sun, still high and hateful, and realize you have a long way to go before the shadows offer any mercy. As the trek continues, the landscape begins to perform feats of impossible geometry. You are staring out across a flat expanse of sun-scorched gravel when, suddenly, the horizon detaches itself from the earth. To your left, a range of jagged mountains that you know are 30 miles away appears to float high in the sky, inverted and shimmering as if seen through a glass of water. This isn't a simple puddle on the road. This is a fata morgana, a superior mirage created by a temperature inversion where cold air is trapped beneath a layer of warm air. To your medieval mind, it feels as though the world is literally unraveling. A divine, or perhaps diabolical sign, that the physical laws of Europe have no jurisdiction here. The Bedouin scouts watching you from the periphery are masters of this optical distortion. They understand that in this shimmering haze, distance is a lie and size is a suggestion. They use this to their advantage by positioning themselves at the exact threshold where the refraction occurs. You look out and see what appears to be a massive army, thousands of spears glinting in the light. But as you squint and blink, the image collapses into just 5 or 6 men on camels. By moving back and forth through these thermal layers, they can make a small raiding party look like a formidable host. Forcing your commander to halt the entire column and form a defensive square, you waste precious energy and time bracing for a charge that never comes. While the sun continues to beat down on your helmet like a smith's hammer, historians still argue whether the mirage craft of the Bedouin was a conscious codified military doctrine, or simply an intuitive mastery of their environment passed down through oral tradition. Regardless of the intent, the result is a psychological grinding stone. You are constantly seeing things that aren't their cool groves, stone towers, or approaching friends only for them to dissolve into the dry air. It's a quirky biological fact that your eyes and brain are working overtime to make sense of the visual noise, consuming even more of your dwindling glucose and water reserves just to maintain the illusion of sight. You essentially overclocking your nervous system in a desert that is already trying to shut you down. The heat has now reached a point where the air itself feels viscous. You notice that the Bedouin raiders aren't just hovering in the distance. They are actively hurting you every time the Crusader column tries to veer toward a suspected water source or a patch of shade provided by a canyon wall. A sudden shower of light whistling arrows comes flying out of the glare. These aren't meant to kill you at least not yet. The arrows are light, designed for range rather than penetration. They are meant to keep you buttoned up inside your armor. Every time you have to raise your shield or lower your visor to protect your face, the temperature inside your helmet jumps by another degree. You're being cooked from the outside in, and the raiders are the ones controlling the flame. There is a fringe tidbit from local chronicles suggesting that Bedouin scouts would sometimes light small, controlled fires of damp brush behind dunes to mix smoke with the natural heat haze. This would further distort the light, making it even harder for your scouts to determine if they were looking at a natural phenomenon or a hidden encampment. You, meanwhile, are struggling with the sheer logistics of staying upright. Your heavy mail shirt is now so hot that it would likely sear your skin if you weren't wearing the thick quilted gambeson beneath it. But that gambeson is now a heavy sponge soaked with gallons of your own sweat. You've probably lost nearly 3 liters of fluid since dawn, and the salt crystals forming on your eyebrows are beginning to sting like acid. You remember your uncle back in Normandy talking about the glory of the sun in the Holy Land. But you're starting to think he was either a liar or a poet, and right now you have no use for either. The Bedouin move with a rhythmic, swaying grace that seems to defy the heat. Their camels are the true marvels here. While your heavy European destrier is beginning to foam at the mouth, its breath coming in ragged, wet thumps, the camels are barely breaking a sweat. Their bodies can withstand fluctuations in core temperature that would kill a horse or a human in an hour. They are the tactical all-terrain vehicles of the 12th century, and they allow the raiders to vanish into the shimmering horizon the moment you try to engage them. A mainstream historical fact often overlooked is that the Crusader army was not just made up of knights. It was followed by a massive tail of pilgrims, foot soldiers, and camp followers. These people don't have the luxury of horses or even decent leather boots. As you look back, you see the line of the march beginning to fray. People are dropping not because of a sword stroke, but because their hearts simply coot unpumped blood fast enough to both cool their skin and power their muscles. The Bedouins see this. They don't attack the armored front. They pick at the edges, the exhausted, the dehydrated, the ones who have been broken by the mirage and the heat. You try to focus on the man in front of you, but the reflection off his polished greaves is blinding. It's a strange irony. The very equipment meant to keep you safe is now a beacon for the sun as fury. Some knights have tried to cover their armor with surcoats of white linen to reflect the light, but the wind keeps whipping the fabric, and the dust of the Levant turns everything a dull, heat-absorbing brown within minutes. You feel a sudden surge of anger, a common symptom of early heat stroke, the unfairness of it all. Why won't they just stand and fight? But the Bedouin aren't interested in your European notions of chivalry. They are interested in the fact that your cognitive functions are degrading. By mid-afternoon, the lake on the horizon has transformed. It now looks like a giant silver serpent winding across the path. Your mind, desperate for relief, starts to invent reasons why this one must be real. Perhaps it's a hidden branch of the Jordan, you tell yourself. Perhaps God has provided a miracle. But the Bedouin know that this particular mirage occurs right before a stretch of soft, sinking silt. They are waiting for you to rush toward the water, hoping to watch you and your horse bog down in the gray powder. It's a weaponization of hope, using your own biological desperation against you. As you plod forward, the sound of the desert begins to change. The wind picks up, but it doesn't bring cool air. It brings a dry, rasping hiss as sand grains blast against your metal plates. The raiders have vanished into the glare again, but you know they are there. They are the kings of the shimmer, and you are just a visitor in a very expensive, very hot metal suit. You take another pull from your canteen, but it's empty. The Fata Morgana laughs at you from the horizon, and you realize that out here, the truth is whatever the sun says it is. The emptiness of your canteen is a terrifying realization, a silent bell tolling for your inevitable decline. In the cool, damp forests of your home, water was something you stepped over or complained about when it fell from the sky. Here, it is the only currency that matters, and the exchange rate is ruinous. You watch your commander take a swig of thick, warm wine from a silver flagon, a standard Crusader practice hand. You can almost feel the collective dehydration of the army worsen. Historians still argue whether the European insistence on drinking fermented alcohol over water was a matter of hygiene or simply a refusal to adapt to local customs. But in this furnace, it is a physiological disaster. Alcohol is a diuretic. It tricks your body into throwing away the very fluids it needs to keep your brain from boiling. The Bedouin, by contrast, are fueling themselves with a biological masterpiece: camel milk. It's a quirky bit of survival science, but camel milk doesn't just provide hydration. It's packed with vitamin C and electrolytes that keep the raiders' nervous systems firing at peak efficiency, while yours are beginning to While you are sipping on vinaigrette wine that leaves your tongue feeling like a piece of dry leather, the men stalking you are drinking a liquid that is essentially a medieval sports drink. They aren't just more comfortable than you. They are physically more capable of making rapid, tactical decisions. You probably wouldn't survive a wrestling match with a 12-year-old Bedouin boy right now. simply because your muscles are starting to cramp from salt loss. Logistics in this landscape are a nightmare of arithmetic. You've heard the rumors that the army's water carts are already half empty, the wooden staves shrinking in the heat and allowing the precious liquid to weep into the thirsty sand. The Bedouin know exactly where the hidden cannot-sentient underground irrigation tunnels are located. They move from one concealed watering hole to the next, staying invisible beneath the surface of the earth while you march across its searing skin. There is a fringe theory that Bedouin raiders would sometimes carry water skins made from the stomachs of camels, which kept the liquid remarkably cool through evaporative cooling, a technology as alien to you as a refrigerator. Your horse, a massive beast bred for the muddy fields of Flanders, is struggling with the physics of the desert. Every step it takes into the soft sand requires 3 times the energy of a stride on firm turf. You can feel the animal's heart hammering through the saddle, a frantic, wet rhythm that signals impending collapse. The Bedouin horses, those lean and flighty Arabians, seem to have a different relationship with the ground. They are smaller, with larger nostrils to cool their blood, and a bone structure that allows them to glide over the dunes rather than fight them. It's a total mismatch of engineering. You are a heavy tank trying to chase a swarm of dirt bikes through a sandbox, and the fuel gauge is rapidly hitting 0. The raiders use your thirst as a tether. They don't need to block your path, they just need to guard the active wells. Earlier today, you saw a shimmering grove of palms that actually turned out to be a rare victory for your icebud. As the vanguard approached, the Bedouin were already there. They didn't fight for the well. Instead, they took a few potshots with their composite bows, and then, with agonizing deliberateness, dumped a basket of dead animals and salt into the water before disappearing into the heaths. They are poisoning your future, forcing you to move toward the next water source, which they also happen to control. It's a slow-motion execution where the axe is a dry throat. One of the more quirky, if slightly gross, tidbits of the era involves the use of moisture traps. Some of your more experienced scouts, men who have been in the Holy Land since the last Crusade, tell stories of how the locals can find water by watching the flight of specific desert birds at dawn, or by digging in the wadis where certain shrubs grow. You try to mimic them, digging a shallow hole in the sand during a brief halt, but all you find is more heat. You remember that crocodile dung sunscreen mentioned by a traveler in the tavern back at Acre. Right now, you'd probably rub it over your entire body if someone told you it would drop your temperature by a single degree. The desperation is starting to override your dignity. The psychological toll of this logistics war is immense. You aren't just thirsty, you are cognitively impaired. Dehydration leads to irritability, and you find yourself snapping at your squire for the way he's holding your lance. You're starting to see double horizons, a result of the light bending so aggressively that the sky and the earth swap places for a heartbeat. The Bedouin understand that a thirsty man is an angry, impulsive man. They want you to get frustrated. They want you to break ranks and charge at a phantom in the distance. Every time you lose your temper, your heart rate spikes, your sweat production increases, and you move one step closer to the fire within. Historians often point out that the success of the great Muslim leader Saladin was unjust in his brilliance as a general, but in his mastery of the supply chain of the sun. He ensured his men had ice brought down from the mountains of Lebanon wrapped in silk. While your king is lucky if he has a cup of tepid puddle water, you are realizing that the Crusades aren't just a war of religions. They are a war of metabolic rates. The Bedouin are cold-blooded in their efficiency, while you are a warm-blooded furnace that is rapidly running out of coolant. The sun is finally beginning to tilt, but it offers no relief. The light is now hitting the desert floor at an angle that turns the entire landscape into a giant mirror, reflecting the glare directly under the brim of your helmet. It's a tactical pincer movement of light one sun in the sky and thousands of tiny suns reflecting off the quartz and salt crystals on the ground. You close your eyes for a second, but the red glow through your eyelids is just as intense. You hear the faint, mocking jingle of camel bells somewhere in the shimmer. They are still there, waiting for the logistics of the furnace to do the work that their swords don't have to. You look down at your hands and the skin is beginning to pull tight over your knuckles, a sign that the fluid in your cells is being diverted to your vital organs. You are shrinking inside your own skin, even as your armor feels like it's expanding, tightening its grip on your chest. The next well is 10 miles away. The Bedouin are 500 yards away. And the water in your canteen, it's just a memory now. A ghost of a life lived in a world where it rained on Tuesdays and the grass was actually green. The sun finally begins its slow descent, but the cooling you prayed for doesn't arrive. Instead, the desert begins to speak. As the thermal layers shift, the air carries sound in ways that defy your European understanding of acoustics. You are trying to set up a perimeter in the deepening twilight, but the silence is punctuated by the sound of ghost hooves. Because the ground is still radiating intense heat into the cooling night air, it creates a sound-conducting channel. You can hear the rhythmic thumping of horses and the low chatter of men as if they are standing 5 feet behind your tent, yet when you rush out with your sword drawn, there is nothing but the vast, empty purple of the dunes. The Bedouin are using the desert as a natural amplifier, a psychological weapon designed to ensure that even when the sun goes down, your heart rate stays up. This is the beginning of the harassment phase. You are exhausted, your muscles are screaming for rest, but the raiders have no intention of letting you sleep. They move in small fluid cells of 3 or 4 riders, circling your camp just outside the range of your campfires. They aren't looking for a fight, they are looking for your sanity. They let out high-pitched ululations that haunting Zagratoth bounce off the cooling. Rocks and seem to come from every direction at once. You find yourself spinning in circles, shield raised, chasing a sound that has no physical source. Historians still argue whether the Crusaders' frequent reports of legions of demons in the night were actually sophisticated Bedouin psychological operations, or simply the auditory hallucinations common to those suffering from severe salt depletion. A quirky bit of medieval desert lore suggests that Bedouin raiders would sometimes tie dry hollow gourds or animal bladders to their saddles. As they rode, the wind rushing through these objects created a low-frequency moaning or whistling sound that mimicked the singing sands of the deep desert. To a knight from the quiet hamlets of England or Germany, this sounded like the very earth was crying out in protest of your presence. It's a brilliant use of ambient noise to maintain a state of hypervigilance, a modern term for a very old problem. You are too scared to close your eyes, and every minute you stay awake is a minute. Your body isn't repairing the damage done by the day as heat. You're essentially being bled dry of your nervous energy. The ghost hooves aren't just a trick of the ears, they are a tactical distraction. While you are focused on the phantom sounds to the north, a pair of raiders has quietly approached from the south, hidden by the deep shadows of the dunes. They don't attack the men, they attack the horses. A single, well-placed arrow into the flank of a tethered destrier causes a chain reaction of panic. Your heavy war horses, already high-strung from the day's thirst, begin to kick and bray, breaking their lines and trampling the very equipment you need to survive. The Bedouin understand that a knight without a horse is just a very slow, very heavy infantryman. By creating chaos in the dark, they are effectively disarming you before the sun even rises. There is a fringe theory that the Bedouin actually coordinated these night movements using the stars, not just for navigation, but as a clock to rotate their raiding parties, ensuring that a fresh group of harassers was always available to keep the Crusaders awake. Meanwhile, you and your comrades are trying to sleep in shifts, but the ground is still too hot to lie on comfortably, and the sudden drop in temperature is starting to make your sweat-soaked gambeson feel like a suit of ice. This thermal seesaw is brutal on the human immune system. You're shivering and burning at the same time, a physiological contradiction that leaves you feeling weak and nauseated. You remember that crocodile dung sunscreen from earlier? Well, right now, you de-trade your finest silken surcoat for a thick wool cloak like the ones the locals wear. You're beginning to see the Saracen not as a barbarian, but as a master of a laboratory you've just been dropped into without a manual. They know that sound travels farther in the dense, cool night air, and they use that to communicate across miles without ever showing a torch. You see a single flash of light on a distant Riga polished mirror reflecting the moon. Or perhaps a signal fire. You'll never know. The uncertainty is a weight just as heavy as your mail. One mainstream historical fact that often gets buried in tales of grand battles is the sheer number of accidental deaths during these night marches. Knights, blinded by exhaustion and the tricks of the desert's acoustics, would often wander away from the main column, convinced they heard a stream or a comrade calling for help. These strays were never seen again. The Bedouin didn't need to waste a spear on them. They simply let the desert do the work. You find yourself gripping the person next to you just to stay grounded in reality. The ghost hooves continue their steady, rhythmic thumping in the distance, a heartbeat for a landscape that wants you gone. As you sit there, staring into the embers of a dying fire, You realize that the Bedouin haven't just mastered the light, they've mastered the silence too. They know that in the void of the desert night, the loudest thing is your own fear. You hear a rustle in the sand. Is it a viper or a scout? You reach for your sword, but your fingers are clumsy and cold. The raiders are out there, somewhere in the purple dark, resting in shifts, drinking their camel milk, and waiting for the sun to return and finish what the night started. You close your eyes for a second, and the sound of the ghost hooves seems to grow louder, marching right through your mind. You realize that this is a war of attrition, where the battlefield is your own central nervous system. Every whistle of the wind and every clatter of a stone is a potential threat, a calculated move in a game you didn't know you were playing. The Bedouin are the Grand Masters, and you are just a piece on the board, slowly being moved toward a checkmate of heat and exhaustion. You take a deep breath, the air finally cool but tasting of dust, and pray for a morning that you know will only bring more fire. The sun crests the horizon not with a gentle morning glow, but with the immediate, aggressive heat of a furnace door being flung open. Within an hour, the fire within begins to claim its first victims. You watch a seasoned knight, a man who survived the siege of Antioch and countless skirmishes in the mud of the north, begin to sway in his saddle. This is the anatomy of a heat stroke, a biological cascade that no prayer or relic can halt. His face, once tanned and weathered, has turned a terrifying shade of ashen gray. Yet he is no longer sweating. His skin is bone-addery and hot to the touch, a sign that his internal cooling system has suffered a total catastrophic failure. In the medieval view, his humors are boiling, a literal overheating of the blood that leads to madness. To you, it's a terrifying look at the limit of human endurance. Historians still argue whether the high mortality rates in Crusader camps were exacerbated by the knights' insistence on bleeding those who fell ill with heat exhaustion. According to the medical theories of the time, a feverish red-faced soldier had an excess of blood, and the solution was to open a vein. In reality, this was the absolute worst thing you could do to a man who was already severely dehydrated. By removing blood, they were lowering the body's ability to transport heat from the core to the skin, essentially accelerating the cooking process. You watch the camp physicians apply leeches to a fallen sergeant, and you feel a cold shiver of dread, one of the few cold things left in this world. You're watching a man die of a science his own people haven't discovered yet. The Bedouin raiders, watching from the ridges, don't need to fire a single arrow to cause a panic. They simply wait for the delirium phase to set in. You see a man suddenly tear off his helmet and start screaming about a river of ice. He begins to run toward a shimmering mirage, shedding his gauntlets and surcoat as he goes. This is paradoxical undressing, a quirky and grim symptom of extreme hypothermia, and occasionally severe heat stroke, where the brain as thermostat breaks so completely that the victim feels like they are burning alive and tries to strip naked. The Bedouin don't interfere. They know that a man who has lost his mind to the sun is already a ghost. They merely track his path, waiting to collect his abandoned equipment once the desert finishes its work. There is a fringe tidbit from local accounts suggesting that Bedouin healers actually practiced a primitive form of evaporative cooling that was centuries ahead of European medicine. They would wrap a heat-stricken person in cloths soaked in precious water or even vinegars and use handheld fans to create a localized breeze. While your monks are praying over a knight's yellowed bile, the raiders are using basic thermodynamics to save their own. It's a stark contrast in survival. One side treats the heat as a divine punishment to be endured, while the other treats it as a physical variable to be managed. You find yourself wondering if the infidels have a better relationship with God's Son than you do. As the column halts to deal with the fallen, the heat continues to build, creating a dome of stagnant air around the armored men. You notice that the horses are suffering even more than the humans. A horse's massive muscle mass generates incredible internal heat, and unlike a human, they can't effectively pant while being ridden hard. You see a destrier's legs buckle, its eyes rolling back to show the whites as it crashes into the sand, pinning its rider beneath a haftan of dying meat. The Bedouin stay just out of reach, their light Arabian horses standing perfectly still, ears twitching. They are the audience to a tragedy of your own making, watching the Iron Men melt under the weight of their own prestige. The mainstream historical fact remains: more Crusaders died from environmental factors and disease than from Saracen blades. The heat stroke was the silent assassin, the Saracen's arrow that didn't need a bow. You feel your own pulse thudding and your temples a heavy, wet sound like a drum wrapped in wool. Your cognitive functions are slipping. You find yourself staring at your own hands, wondering why they look so far away. The salt loss has begun to trigger painful locking cramps in your calves and abdomen. You try to drink from your skin, but the water is so hot it almost scalds your throat. The Bedouin use this moment of medical crisis to launch a feint. A small group of riders gallops toward your disorganized line, shouting and clashing shields. Your instincts scream at you to mount up and countercharge. But the moment you try to lift your heavy lance, your vision swims with black spots. The fire within is making you clumsy. The raiders pull away before you can even close your visor, laughing as they vanish back into the glare. They aren't trying to kill you. They are trying to force your heart to beat at 160 beats per minute in a 110-degree environment. They are weaponizing your own adrenaline, using it to burn through your remaining physiological reserves. You'll remember the ghost hooves of the night before and realize they were just the overture. The heat stroke is the main performance. You look at the man next to you, his eyes are fixed on something you can't see, and he's whispering a nursery rhyme from his childhood in the Occitan tongue. He's gone, even if his heart is still beating. You feel a strange, detached pity for him, and then a sharper fear for yourself. How long until your own humors begin to boil? How long until you start seeing the ice river too? By midday, the anatomy of a heat stroke has become the primary geography of the march. The path is littered with discarded shields, abandoned helmets, and men sitting in the sand with the 1,000-yard stare of the doomed. The Bedouin move among the periphery like scavengers, picking up the high-quality steel you can no longer carry. They are patient, they are cool. They are the masters of the kiln, and you are just the clay, being fired until you crack. You take a shaky breath, feeling the searing air scratch your lungs, and try to remember the name of your horse. You can't. The sun has burned it away. Just as you think the sun has reached its absolute peak of cruelty, the sky begins to undergo a terrifying transformation. The horizon, which had been a shimmering line of blue and gold, suddenly bruises into a deep, sickly purple. The air, previously stagnant and heavy, grows deathly still for a heartbeat before a hot, dry gust slams into your face. This is the Khamsin, the 50-day wind end to the Bedouin. It is a literal smokescreen provided by the heavens. Within minutes, the world is swallowed by a fine, suffocating powder of pulverized rock and ancient dust. You can no longer see the man 3 feet in front of you. You can only hear the frantic clattering of his armor and the panicked whinnying of horses lost in the orange gloom. The Bedouin raiders don't retreat from this storm. They lean into it. While you are struggling to pull a damp rag over your face to keep from inhaling the grit, the raiders are using the Khamsin as a tactical veil. They have lived through these storms since childhood and know how to navigate by the feel of the wind and the angle of the dunes. To them, the sandstorm isn't a disaster. It's an opportunity to close the distance. Historians still argue whether the Bedouin's ability to coordinate attacks during such visibility events was due to prearranged blind signals or an uncanny localized knowledge of the terrain that allowed them to move where you could only stumble. There is a quirky fringe tidbit about the Khamsin that you're currently experiencing firsthand: the static electricity. As the dry sand particles rub against each other at high speeds, the air becomes supercharged. You see tiny, ghostly sparks of blue light St. Elmo's fire dancing along the tips of your spears and the edges of your sword hilt. To a medieval knight, this is terrifying. It looks like sorcery or a divine curse. The Bedouin, however, understand the desert's moods. They know that this dragon's breath makes your metal armor even more of a liability. As the fine dust works its way into the joints of your harness, acting like sandpaper and grinding your movement to a halt. You aren't just fighting a storm, you're being physically eroded. The Khamsin is a silent ally to the raider because it levels the playing field. Your greatest advantage are heavy, disciplined cavalry charges, useless when you can't see the ground beneath your horse's hooves. The Bedouin move through the grit like sharks in murky water. Suddenly, a shadow appears in the orange haze. You hear a sharp thwack as a composite bow releases and a light arrow thuds into your wooden shield. You swing your sword at the air, but the shadow is gone, swallowed by the wind before your blade can even complete its arc. They are picking you apart, one terrified soldier at a time, using the wind to mask their approach and the sand to muffle their retreat. A mainstream historical fact of the Crusades is the frequency with which entire detachments simply vanished during these environmental shifts. It wasn't always a grand massacre. Often, it was just the desert taking what was offered. The campsin saps the last of your moisture, the wind evaporating your sweat before it can even cool you. You feel your skin start to crack and bleed, the grit getting into the wounds and causing immediate stinging inflammation. You remember that crocodile dung and the cooling oils of the locals, and you realize that their primitive beauty standards were actually sophisticated dermatological defenses against a world that wants to peel you like a grape. The raiders also used the campsin to mask the sound of their camels. Normally, the distinctive gait of a camel can be heard from a distance, but the howling of the 50-day wind creates a wall of white noise. They can bring a dozen riders within 20 paces of your perimeter without anyone noticing. You see the flash of a scimitar curved blade designed specifically for the drawcut, which is much more effective than your heavy European broadsword when fighting in the restricted, blinding environment of a dust storm. The curve allows them to slice and move in one fluid motion, whereas your overhead pommel strikes are likely to leave you off balance and vulnerable to the wind's shove. There's a fringe theory among military archaeologists that the Bedouin actually used the specific whistling frequencies of the campsin to relay commands. By using high-pitched bone whistles that mimicked the wind's scream, they could signal a retreat or a pincer movement right under your nose, and you would simply think the storm was getting louder. Meanwhile, you are shouting orders that are swallowed by your own helmet. You feel a sense of profound isolation. Even though you are surrounded by thousands of men, you are alone in a private box of orange dust and heat. As the wind begins to howl even louder, the temperature actually rises. The campsin acts like a giant hairdryer, pushing the ambient heat to 115 or 120 degrees. You can feel the metal of your gorget burning your throat. You realize that the Bedouin aren't just attacking you with steel. They are letting the smokescreen do the heavy lifting. Every breath you take fills your lungs with fine silt, making you cough and gasp, further dehydrating your mucous membranes. You are becoming a statue of dust, a monument to a kingdom that didn't understand the wind. The storm will eventually break, but when it does, the world will have changed. The dunes will have shifted, the paths will be gone, and half of your supplies will be buried under 6 inches of grit. The Bedouin will still be there, though, waiting on the edges of the clearing air. Their dark robes shook clean of the sand, their eyes protected by the very veils you mocked. You realized that the campsin was an obstacle, for the mit was a weapon they knew how to aim. You take a shuddering breath, tasting the desert, and wait for the dust to settle so you can see who is left standing. The dust of the campsin begins to settle, revealing a landscape that has been subtly redesigned by the wind. But your focus is no longer on the dunes. It is on the agonizing sound of a horse in distress. Your destrier, the pride of your stable back in Europe, is failing. These massive animals were bred for the shock of the charge, designed to carry a man in full-plate armor through a wall of infantry. But as you look at your mount, you see a creature that was never meant for the soft geometry of the East. Its heavy, broad hooves sink deep into the shifting sand with every step, turning a simple march into a grueling, high-intensity workout. The animal is lathered in a thick white foam, its chest heaving with a wet, rattling sound that suggests its lungs are being seared by the dry air. In stark contrast, the Bedouin move with a terrifying, effortless grace. You watch a group of raiders skip across a ridgeline, and it's a masterclass in biological engineering. Their Arabian horses are smaller, leaner, and possess a floating gait. While your horse fights the sand, their horses seem to dance over it. This isn't just luck. It's as the result of a larger lung capacity and a bone structure that favors agility over raw mass. But the real nightmare for you is the camel, the ship of the desert. A camel's foot is a broad, fatty pad that spreads out when it hits the ground, providing natural snowshoe-like flotation on the softest silt. While you are bogged down, the Bedouin are effectively operating on a different physical plane. Historians still argue whether the Crusader failure to pivot toward light cavalry was a result of cultural arrogance or a lack of access to the specific breeding stocks of the Orient. You, however, don't care about the academic why. You only care about the fact that your tactical mobility has vanished. Your heavy cavalry is your primary weapon, your nuke of the 12th century. Without the ability to build up speed for a Couchitlands charge, you are just a very expensive, very slow target. The Bedouin know this. They stay exactly 30 yards beyond the distance your exhausted horse can sprint. They are teasing you, Louis-Entrepetring, forcing you to waste the last of your mount's strength in useless, short bursts of pursuit. There is a quirky, somewhat grim tidbit regarding the camel-cavalry interface. Horses, by their nature, are often terrified of the smell of camels. If a horse hasn't been desensitized to that musky, pungent odor, it can fall into a state of sheer panic. The Bedouin raiders use this biological glitch to great effect. They will ride their camels upwind of your picket lines, letting the scent drift down. You watch in horror as your line of war horses begins to kick, bite, and bolt, terrified by the invisible monster on the breeze. It's a weapon that costs the Bedouin nothing but a bit of positioning. Yet it can dismantle your entire formation before a single sword is drawn. A mainstream historical fact that you re-feeling in your very marrow is that a camel can go for weeks without water, whereas your horse is a liquid-cooled engine that is currently out of coolant. By the third day of a desert trek, a horse's blood begins to thicken from dehydration, making every heartbeat a monumental effort. The Bedouin raiders understand the thermal limits of your animals better than you do. They time their harrying attacks to coincide with the hottest part of the afternoon, knowing that even if you wanted to chase them, your horse's internal temperature would spike to lethal levels within minutes. They aren't just out-fighting you, they are out-engineering you. You see a raider in the distance, perched casually atop a drum. He isn't wearing a scrap of metal. He has a composite bow, a light spear, and a leather buckler. He looks at you encased in your 60 pounds of steel, sitting atop a dying Hattin beast-stand. He doesn't look afraid. He looks bored. He knows that the equine misery of the Crusaders is his greatest tactical asset. He can travel 50 miles in a day and arrive fresh. You can barely manage 10, and by the end, you and your horse are both on the verge of heart failure. There's a fringe theory that the Bedouin would actually train their camels to grunt or bellow on command during night raids. In the echoing canyons of the Levant, the sound of 100 angry camels sounds like a literal horde of dragons. It's another layer of the psychological warfare we've been talking about, using the biology of the desert to convince you that you are fighting something supernatural. You find yourself patting your horse's neck, feeling the salt crust and the heat radiating off its skin. And you realize that your destrier is a liability in a land that values the light and the nimble. The raiders begin a slow circle around your unit. They aren't charging, they are cycling. One group shoots, retreats, and is immediately replaced by another. This is the Karwa Farthi attack, and retreat, and it is perfectly suited to their light mounts. Your horse tries to pivot to face the threat, but its hooves are caught in a pocket of sugar sand. You feel the animal stumble, its knees hitting the ground with a sickening thud. You manage to stay in the saddle, but the dignity of the knight is gone. You are now just a man sitting on a stationary animal in a shooting gallery. The Bedouin watch you struggle with a sort of clinical detachment. They have mastered the camel mastery that allows them to live, sleep, and fight in this waste. They use their mounts as mobile shields, as water tanks, and as high-ground platforms. You realize that in this environment, the superior European technology is an anchor, and the primitive desert nomad is a kite. You take a deep breath, the air still tasting of horse-wheat and dust, and look at the shimmering horizon. The raiders are moving again, their camels swaying in that rhythmic, hypnotic gait that seems to say, "We can do this all day." The heat has a way of turning the world into a liquid, and as you squint through the shimmering haze of mid-afternoon, you see it. A vast, glassy lake of sapphire water. It's nestled right between two low-lying hills of black basalt rock. Your eyes, parched and stinging with salt, insist that this is real. You can see the reflection of the sky on the surface. You can almost hear the lap of the waves against the shore. Your commander, perhaps driven by the same delirium or a desperate need to keep the men from mutiny, points his gauntleted hand toward the blue. The column swerves. This is the Mirage as a tactical lure. You are being funneled. The Bedouin scouts aren't just watching you, they are beating you like game animals. Toward a specific point on the map, they know that the refraction of light in this specific valley creates a near-perfect inferior mirage. They also know that the shore of that fake lake is actually a field of jagged volcanic basalt. As you urge your flagging horse toward the cooling blue, the ground begins to change. The soft sand gives way to a scree of sharp, dark stones that are as hot as coals. This rock absorbs the sun's energy all day, radiating it back up at your horse's tender frogs and hooves. Before you realize the water isn't getting any closer, you are deep within a natural kill zone. Historians still argue whether the luring tactics seen in battles like those leading up to the Horns of Hattin were planned months in advance or were simply an opportunistic use of the terrain. Regardless, the effect is a mechanical trap. As your unit enters the basalt field, your movement slows to a crawl. You can't charge over these rocks. Your horse would break a leg in seconds. The Bedouin, who have been hovering on your flanks, suddenly vanish behind the black ridges. You are now at the bottom of a shallow bowl of heat radiating stone, staring at a lake that has abruptly vanished, replaced by the dry, mocking glare of the desert floor. You've been ghosted by the atmosphere itself. A quirky tidbit of desert survival involves the thermal capacity of these rocks. While the sand reflects heat, the basalt stores it. Even if a cloud were to pass over the sun, the ground beneath you would remain at 120 degrees for hours. You are essentially standing on a giant griddle. You notice that the Bedouin raiders have reappeared on the rim of the basalt field. They don't come down to join you. Why would they? They stay on the cooler, sandy high ground where the wind can still reach them. They begin to rain down arrows, not in a volley, but in a steady, rhythmic harassment that forces you to keep your heavy shield raised. The physical effort of holding a wooden and leather heater shield against the sun's glare is enough to push your heart rate into the danger zone. The mainstream historical fact of this engagement style is the asymmetry of effort. You are using massive amounts of energy to survive a trap you walked into willingly, while the Bedouin are using almost none. They are letting the geography do the killing. You feel a surge of Mirages, the sudden violent anger that comes when the brain realizes it has been cheated by its own senses. You want to scream at the sky, but your throat is so dry the sound comes out as a raspy click. You're starting to see the Saracen not as a man, but as a part of the landscape, as inescapable as the sun or the thirst. There is a fringe theory that the Bedouin actually used dummy camps to enhance these mirages, by placing a few bright white tents or reflective metal sheets near a mirage-prone area. They could make the lake look like a populated oasis, a safe harbor that would draw a tired army miles off their intended path. You look around and see a few scraps of white cloth fluttering on the basalt ridges. Are those scouts, or just more lures? You can no longer trust your eyes. The desert has broken the contract between your brain and the physical world. The basalt trap serves another purpose. It destroys your equipment. The intense heat of the stones can actually soften the glue and resins used in your saddle and shield. You feel your seat becoming unstable as the leather begins to slip against the wood. Meanwhile, the Bedouin are perfectly comfortable. They move with the knowledge of microclimates, staying in the thin strips of shade cast by the jagged rocks, while you are forced to stand in the center of the glare. They are weight masters. They know that every 10 minutes you spend in this rock oven is equal to an hour of hard fighting. You try to signal a retreat to get back to the sand where the horses can move, but the Bedouin have already moved to block the neck of the valley. They aren't closing in for the kill yet. They are just standing there, silhouetted against the sun. They know that the lake you were chasing was the last bit of hope you had left. Now that the illusion is gone, the psychological collapse will be rapid. You look down at your horse's legs and see blood where the sharp basalt has sliced the fetlocks. The animal is shivering despite the heat. As the section ends, you are standing in the middle of a black rock desert, the air wobbling with heat, watching the lake reappear 5 miles to your rear. It's as if the desert is laughing at you, moving the water wherever it's most inconvenient. You realize that the Bedouin didn't need to defeat your army. They just needed to introduce you to the mirage and let your own desperation do the rest. You take a final dry breath and prepare to move, but you don't know which way is forward anymore. The sun has shifted its position in the sky, moving from a blunt hammer at the top of your skull to a piercing needle aimed directly at your eyes. This is no cosmic coincidence. The Bedouin have circled your position specifically to engage from the west. As you look out toward the ridges, the world becomes a blinding white void. The glare off the quartzy sand and the polished surface of the rocks is so intense that you are forced to squint until your face muscles ache, yet you still can't see the danger. This is sundazzle, a tactical positioning that turns the very light of the world into a physical barrier. You are a knight trained in the art of the parry and the riposte, but you cannot fight what you cannot see. The Bedouin skirmishers are now perfectly silhouetted against the sun. To them, you are a brightly lit target, your steel armor reflecting the light and making you a beacon in the wasteland. To you, they are nothing but dark, flickering shapes dancing in the shimmer. They begin to lope forward on their lean horses, closing the distance to 50 yards before releasing a stream of arrows. You try to time your shield block, but the flare of the sun at the moment of their release makes it impossible to track the flight of the shafts. You are playing a game of lethal hide-and-seek, where the seeker is invisible behind a wall of golden fire. Historians still argue whether the sunlangling used by Middle Eastern armies was a formalized military science or an intuitive byproduct of their nomadic hunting traditions. What is clear, however, is the archer's advantage it provides. A composite bow in the hands of a Bedouin is a miracle of medieval engineering layers of horn, wood, and sinew glued together to create a weapon with a draw weight that rivals a longbow but in a compact frame. Because they are shooting with the sun at their backs, they can take their time. Picking out the gaps in your malure throat, your armpits, your horse's unprotected chestwile. You are forced to fight with one hand, practically covering your eyes. There is a quirky and slightly brilliant fringe tidbit regarding the antimony or coal that you see smeared around the eyes of the raiders. Back in Europe, you might have thought it was a feminine vanity. But as your own eyes sting and water from the relentless UV radiation, you realize the coal is a functional tool. It acts as a primitive anti-glare coating, absorbing the light rays that would otherwise bounce off their cheekbones and into their pupils. You, meanwhile, have no such protection. Your pale skin is burning, and your eyes are becoming bloodshot and strained, a condition that medieval chroniclers often described as the desert's red veil. The mainstream historical fact that haunts this moment is the sheer rate of fire a mounted Bedouin archer can achieve. Using a thumb draw technique rather than the Mediterranean three-finger pull, they can notch and release an arrow in seconds, all while guiding their horse with their knees. You are trapped in a thermal pincer. If you lower your visor to protect your face from the arrows, the ventilation in your helmet drops to near zero, and your own breath begins to scald your face. If you keep your visor up to breathe, you risk a sunblind arrow taking your eye. It is a choice between suffocating in the dark or being blinded by the light. The raiders are using dazzle tactics in other ways too. Some of them carry small, highly polished copper mirrors, or even just their own burnished blades, which they use to catch the sun and flash your horses. You feel your mount rearing and tossing its head as a sudden intense beam of light strikes it directly in the eye. The animal doesn't understand the physics of reflection. It only knows that the world has suddenly turned into a stinging white flash. This creates microshows in your ranks, preventing you from ever establishing a solid defensive line. There is a fringe theory that the shimmer of the Hethes actually causes a size illusion during these sundazzle attacks, because the hot air is bending the light. The approaching raiders can appear much taller or wider than they actually are, making their numbers seem overwhelming. You see a row of what looks like 10-foot-old giants charging out of the sun, and for a moment, your courage falters. By the time your brain corrects the image, they have already loosed their arrows and turned back into the glare. It's a relentless, high-speed psychological grinding that uses your own biology to betray you. You try to order a countercharge, but as your men turn their horses into the sun, the formation immediately shatters. Men are bumping into each other, blinded and disoriented. The Bedouins simply move 10 yards to the left, staying in the blind spot created by the solar angle. They are the directors of this play, and you are just an actor who has forgotten his lines because the stage lights are too bright. You realize that the weapon is und the Arrowit S, the 3 minutes of blindness that occur every time you look toward the horizon. As the afternoon wears on, the glare doesn't fade. It just changes color, turning from a white heat to a deep, bruising orange that seems to saturate everything. The raiders are still there, hovering in the golden hour, where they are most invisible and you are most exposed. You take a shaky breath, your eyes throbbing with a dull, rhythmic pain, and realize that you've spent the last 3 hours fighting a star. The Bedouin are just the messengers. You are being dismantled by the very light of the day, and there is no shield in Christendom large enough to block it. The ground beneath your horse's hooves changes again, shifting from the jagged basalt to a flat, eerie expanse of blinding white. You have entered the Chott, the great salt flats that pockmark the edges of the desert. At first, your parched mind thinks of snow, a cruel memory of home, but the heat quickly dispels the delusion. The salt isn't cold. It's a crystalline mirror that reflects nearly 80% of the sun's UV radiation directly back up at you. While the sand was hot, the salt flat is a light trap. The glare is coming from the sky, yes, but it's also coming from the ground, hitting you under your chin, behind your greaves, and into the narrow slits of your helmet. You are being cross-baked in a world that has no shadows. The Bedouin raiders don't shy away from these flats. They use them as a blinding zone. They know that the white crust is often deceptive. Beneath the saltkin lie a layer of slick black mud or dry quicksand that can swallow a heavy horse to its knees. They navigate these flats with a specialized knowledge of the surface's color and texture. Moving in single file along invisible paths of firm ground, you, desperate to cross this open kill zone as quickly as possible, push your column into a wide formation. You soon hear the terrifying wet thwomp of a horse's leg breaking through the crust. The more the animal struggles, the deeper it sinks into the saline mire. The Bedouin don't even waste arrows. They just sit on the horizon and watch the salt do the work. Historians still argue whether the Crusaders' salt blindness, a temporary but agonizing condition, was a primary factor in their loss of tactical cohesion during long marches. Modern science tells us that the albedo effect of the salt flats can cause literal burns on the retinas of unprotected eyes. To a 12th century knight, this feels like a localized plague. You find yourself blinking back tears of salt and frustration, your vision blurring into a milky haze where the white earth and the blue sky bleed into one another. You've lost all sense of depth perception. Is that Bedouin rider 50 yards away or 500? In the chott space is an accordion that the desert plays at your expense. There is a quirky fringe tidbit regarding the salt crust and your armor. As you sweat, the moisture evaporates instantly in the dry air, leaving behind a layer of salt on your skin. But now, the fine salt dust from the flats is being kicked up by the wind, mixing with the sweat-soaked padding of your gambeson. This creates a highly abrasive brine paste that begins to chafe your skin raw with every movement. Within an hour, your underarms and groin are bleeding, the salt getting into the open sores and causing a stinging agony that makes it impossible to focus on the enemy. The Bedouin, in their loose silk-lined robes, are effectively immune to this salt sanding. It's a biological tax you have to pay just for being there. The mainstream historical fact remains that the salt flats were often used as strategic bottlenecks. The raiders would intentionally leave the easy path through the flats open, knowing it led directly into a pocket of hypersaline air where the heat was most intense. They call it the breath of the devil. The air here is so dry, it sucks the moisture out of your eyeballs and throat with every breath. You notice that your leather straps are beginning to shrink and crack, the salt leaching the oils out of the hide. Your very equipment is becoming brittle, just like your resolve. The raiders use the chott as a stage for a specific kind of psychological theater. They will ride in large circles, kicking up massive clouds of white salt dust. In the shimmering heat, these clouds look like the approach of a gargantuan army, the salt ghosts. You watch as your vanguard halts, terrified by the sight of what looks like 10,000 reinforcements appearing from the void. It's a ruse, of course just 20 men and a lot of dust, but in your depleted state, you can't tell the difference. Your commander loses another hour of travel time by ordering a defensive formation against a cloud of dust. There, as a fringe theory, that the Bedouin actually used the salt to treat their horses' hooves, hardening them against the desert floor, while the same salt was rotting the stitching in your European leather boots. You look down and see the soles of your boots beginning to peel away, exposed to the 140-degree surface of the salt. You are literally falling apart from the feet up. You try to remember the cool, damp moss of the woods back home, but the memory feels like a lie told by a different person in a different life. The raiders move in for a salt strike. They emerge from the white haze, their dark shapes appearing like holes in the universe. They loose a volley of arrows and then vanish back into the glare. You can't even see where they went. The white and white world offers no landmarks, no horizon, no hope. You are lost in a bowl of light, and the Bedouin are the only ones who know the way out. They are weight masters, and they know that the chott is the ultimate test of your internal plumbing. If you don't find water in the next 4 hours, the salt will claim you as a permanent monument. As you finally stumble off the white crust and back onto the gravel, your eyes are throbbing, and your skin is a map of salt burns and sores. The Bedouin are still there, hovering on the edge of the glare, their silhouettes mocking your slow, heavy gait. You realize that the salt flats weren't just a place you crossed. They were a weapon that stripped you of your sight and your skin. You take a breath of the hot, dry air and prepare for the next horror, wondering what else the desert has in its arsenal. The salt flats are behind you, But the relief is short-lived as you realize the true nature of your protection. For a knight of the 12th century, armor is more than defense. It is a status symbol, a theological statement of the armor of God. But in the dead air of a Levantan afternoon, your polished steel has betrayed its holy purpose. You are currently experiencing the physics of a convection oven. Modern studies in thermodynamics show that polished metal surfaces, while reflective of some light, are incredibly efficient at trapping the heat generated by the body inside. Your mail and plates are acting as a heat sink, absorbing the 110-degree ambient temperature and conducting it directly into the moisture-saturated padding of your gambeson. You are essentially being steamed in your own sweat, trapped in a metal coffin that you cannot legally or safely remove. Historians still argue whether the Crusader transition to surcoats, long flowing tunics worn over the armor, was primarily a heraldic development or a desperate attempt at thermal regulation. You can feel the difference when a slight breeze catches the white linen of your surcoat, but it's a drop of water in an ocean of fire. Underneath that cloth, the air is stagnant. Your core temperature is likely hovering around 102 degrees, a state of exertional heat illness that turns your muscles to lead. Every time you move your arm to adjust your reins, you are fighting the friction of heavy metal links that have become too hot to touch with bare skin. The Bedouin know this. They aren't trying to pierce your breastplate. They are waiting for the steel to cook the meat inside. There is a quirky fringe tidbit about armor scald that the chroniclers rarely mentioned, but you are living through. The rivets and buckles of your harness, being solid points of metal, reach temperatures high enough to cause second-degree burns if they shift against your skin. You have learned to move with a strange, gingerly stiffness to keep the hot metal from touching your neck or wrists. Meanwhile, the Bedouin raiders move with a fluid, loose-limbed ease. Their lack of heavy armor isn't a sign of poverty, it's a tactical choice for thermal mobility. They can sustain a gallop for 20 minutes and recover in 5. If you tried the same, your heart would likely undergo a thermal seizure as it fails to pump enough blood to both your muscles and your overheated skin. The mainstream historical fact that keeps you awake at night is the weight-heat ratio. A fully armored knight carries roughly 60 to 70 pounds of gear. In the cool climate of Europe, this is manageable. Here, every extra pound increases the metabolic cost of movement, which in turn generates more internal body heat. You are caught in a feedback loop of hyperthermia. The Bedouin use Hitandran tactics to exploit this. They will approach just close enough to trigger your combat mode. Your adrenaline spikes, your heart rate climbs, and your body begins to generate massive amounts of internal heat in preparation for a fight. Then, the raiders simply ride away. They've forced your body to rev its engine in a heat wave, burning through your remaining fluids and raising your core temp, all without ever swinging a sword. You notice a peculiar behavior among the raiders. They seem to be wearing more layers than you'd expect. Loose robes of wool and silk. It's another bit of desert irony. Those layers actually insulate them against the external heat, while the thinness of your metal plates allows the sun's energy to pass right through. There is a fringe theory that some Bedouin units would even soak their inner tunics in water at dawn, using the slow evaporation throughout the day to keep their skin temperature significantly lower than the air. You, however, are bonadrie on the outside and drowning in salt sweet on the inside. You feel a sudden hysterical urge to strip off your mail and throw it into the dunes. But you know that the moment you do, the shadows on the horizon will become very real, very fast. The raiders are now engaging in armor mockery. They ride in circles just out of bowshot, clashing their light wooden shields and laughing. They know you can't catch them. They are baiting you into a heavy pursuit. If you break into a gallop, the air friction against your armor won't cool you. The air is hotter than your body, so moving fast actually increases the rate at which heat is transferred into your suit. It's a literal oven with a fan on. You watch a younger knight, unable to take the mockery any longer, spur his horse forward. Within 300 yards, his horse stumbles, and the knight falls sideways, unable to even brace his fall because his muscles have vapor-locked from the heat. There's a quirky bit of medieval physics at play here, involving the color of your gear. While many knights prefer polished white steel to reflect the sun, the dust of the desert has coated everything in a fine matibron film. This layer of grime actually increases the emissivity of the metal, making it absorb heat even faster. You are no longer a shining beacon of Christendom. You are a dull, heat-absorbing rock. The Bedouin, whose dark robes you once thought were a mistake, are actually benefiting from radiative cooling. The dark fabric absorbs the heat from their bodies, and the wind carries it away. It's a sophisticated bit of primitive technology that is currently beating your advanced ironage gear. By late afternoon, the metal of your helmet is so hot that the moisture from your breath is condensing on the visor and then instantly turning into a hot, humid mist. You are breathing in a private sauna. Your cognitive functions are fading into a heat fog. You find yourself looking at your own gauntlet and wondering what those strange metal fingers are. The Bedouin see the armor drag in your posture. They see your lowered head and your sagging shoulders. They know that the Iron Men are reaching their melting point. As the sun begins to dip, you expect relief, but the armor holds onto the heat with a stubborn vengeance. Even as the air begins to cool, your mail remains hot to the touch, a lingering reminder of the sun's grip. You realize that out here, your armor isn't a fortress, it's a cage. The Bedouin are the ones who are truly free, moving like the wind while you are anchored to the earth by 60 pounds of hot, angry steel. You take a final gasping breath of the evening air and wait for the metal to finally, mercifully, go cold. As the sun finally slips below the jagged edge of the world, you expect a reprieve, a celestial apology for the day's torment. Instead, you find that the desert night brings a different, more insidious kind of lethality. In the Levant, the lack of cloud cover and humidity means the heat absorbed by the earth during the day escapes into space with terrifying speed. Within 2 hours, the temperature plummets from a blistering 110 degrees to a bone-chilling 45. This nightfall's false promise is a physiological wrecking ball. Your body, which has been working overtime to dump heat, now has to pivot instantly to conserving it. Your sweat-soaked gambeson, which was a steaming sponge an hour ago, is now a cold, clammy weight that pulls the heat directly out of your core. The Bedouin raiders are masters of this thermal transition. While you are shivering in your cooling metal cage, they are wrapping themselves in heavy wool, abaya-dark, thick cloaks that trap a layer of warm air against their bodies. Historians still argue whether the Crusaders' failure to adapt their clothing was due to the rigid social hierarchy, where a knight must always look like a knightor, simply a lack of spare baggage. Either way, you are currently experiencing cold shock. Your joints, already inflamed from the day's exertion and the salt chafing, begin to seize up in the chill. You try to grip your sword hilt, but your fingers feel like wooden pegs. The Iron Men are becoming frozen men, and the raiders know exactly when your mobility is at its lowest. A quirky, fringe tidbit about the desert night involves the cracking. As the temperature drops, the various types of rock in the wadis contract at different rates. You sit in your camp, listening to sudden sharp cracks echoing through the darkness. Sounds like pistol shots or the snapping of dry wood. To your jumpy, sleep-deprived mind, it sounds like an approaching army or the breaking of spears. The Bedouin use these natural sound effects to mask their own movements. They know that in the symphony of a cooling desert, the soft pad of a camel's foot is indistinguishable from the settling of the earth. They move through your perimeter like shadows within shadows, their dark cloaks making them invisible against the starlight. The mainstream historical fact that haunts the Crusader night is nocturnal dehydration. Even though it's cold, you are still losing fluid through respiration in the incredibly dry air. Every breath you take in the chill night air carries away a microfraction of your remaining water. You wake up if you manage to sleep at all with a tongue that feels like a piece of dry bark and a headache that thumps in time with your heart. The Bedouin, meanwhile, are huddling together, sharing the warmth of their camels and sipping small amounts of water or milk. They aren't fighting the night, they are nesting in it. They are resting their nervous systems while yours is being shredded by vigilance, fatigue. There is a fringe theory that the Bedouin would intentionally leave cold trails for your scouts. They would light small, smokeless fires in one direction to draw your attention, then move their actual force through a freezing, lightless canyon to get behind you. You see a flicker of orange light on a distant dune and feel a surge of primal hope. Is it a friendly outpost? A village? You want to move toward it, but your commander, wiser, or perhaps just more cynical, forbids it. He knows that in this landscape, light is often just another mirage, a visual lure designed to pull you away from the safety of the group and into the freezing dark where the raiders wait. The raiders use the night to engage in low-intensity terror. They don't need to kill 100 men, they just need to kill one sentry every 2 hours. You hear a muffled gasp, the sound of a struggle that lasts only seconds and then silence. When the relief guard arrives, the sentry is gone, not dead, just vanished into the dark, leaving behind only his spear. It's a message. The desert has taken him, and it will take you to. This psychological pressure, combined with the thermal seesaw of the day and night, causes morale to fracture. You see men weeping quietly into their cloaks, not from wounds, but from the sheer relentless otherness of this place. You notice a peculiar biological phenomenon. Your horse's breath is coming out in thick white plumes, but the camels nearby seem to barely breathe at all. It's a quirky bit of evolution. Camels have specialized nasal passages that reclaim the moisture from their breath before it leaves their bodies. They are closed-loop systems, perfectly adapted for the night's dry chill. Your horse, however, is essentially a Hettenwarcher. By dawn, the animal will be even more depleted than it was at sunset. You feel a strange envy for the raiders' mounts, these alien creatures that seem to thrive where everything you brought with you is dying. As the pre-dawn blue hour arrives, the cold reaches its peak. This is the time when human metabolism is at its lowest, and the fire within is a mere ember. The Bedouin know this is the perfect time for a harassment volley. Suddenly, out of the dark, a dozen arrows whistle into the camp. They aren't aimed at specific targets. They are just meant to wake everyone up, to force you to stand in the freezing wind and don your heavy cold armor. The metal plates feel like sheets of ice against your skin. You are fumbling with buckles, your teeth chattering so hard you can barely hear the orders being shouted. By the time the first hint of gold appears on the horizon, you are exhausted, freezing, and mentally broken. The nightfall's false promise has delivered only misery. You look out over the dunes as the sun begins to rise, and for a split second, you find yourself actually wishing for the heat against anything to stop the shivering. But then you see them. The Bedouin raiders are already mounted, silhouetted against the rising sun, looking as fresh as if they'd spent the night in a palace. They've survived the cold, and now they're ready to hand you back over to the sun. The morning sun has barely cleared the horizon before the world begins to wobble again, and you realize that you are being tracked by ghosts. This is the hour of the shadow tactics, a period where the Bedouin utilize the long, deceptive shadows of the early day and the burgeoning heath haze of mid-morning to remain effectively invisible while standing in plain sight. You look to your right and see a shimmering distortion on the crest of a dune. It looks like a flickering flame or a ripple in a pond. You blink, and it's gone. You aren't being followed by an army that marches in step. You are being stalked by a presence that moves only when the atmosphere allows it to hide. The Bedouin understand a fundamental principle of desert optics. Midday is the safest time to move if you want to remain unseen. While a European scout would think that the brightest part of the day offers the best visibility, the opposite is true here. The intense vertical sun creates a wash of light that flattens all features, and the rising thermal currents create a thick layer of turbulent air near the ground. This shimmer acts as a natural cloaking device. Historians still argue whether the Bedouins' invisibility was a result of specialized camouflage-using gutras and robes that perfectly matched the local siltor, a sophisticated understanding of how light refracts at different heights from the sand. A quirky fringe tidbit about these shadow tactics involves the camel crouch. Bedouin raiders have been known to train their mounts to kneel and stay perfectly still in the hollows of dunes during the peak shimmer. Because the heath haze is most intense at eye level, a stationary camel and rider become indistinguishable from a weathered rock or a clump of scrub brush. You might pass within 100 yards of a dozen armed men and never see them because your brain is trying to filter out the noise of the heat waves. You are essentially a blind predator being watched by a very patient prey. The mainstream historical fact of this psychological warfare is the leaking of information. The Bedouin don't just hide, they choose when to be seen. You see a single rider appear on a ridge, silhouetted clearly against the sky. He watches you for exactly 1 minute, then vanishes. 10 minutes later, he or another like him appears on the opposite ridge. This creates the omnipresence illusion. To your exhausted mind, it feels as though the entire desert is populated by raiders, that they are ahead of you, behind you, and inside your very thoughts. It's a tactical use of visual echoes designed to keep your unit in a state of permanent, energy-draining high alert. There is a fringe theory that the Bedouin used the shimmer to mask the dust clouds of their horses. By riding at a specific pace that's synchronized with the oscillation of the heat waves, they could prevent the massive plumes of sand that would normally give away a cavalry movement. You, on the other hand, move like a slow, clanking earthquake. Your column kicks up a rooster tail of dust that can be seen from 20 miles away. You are the only thing in the desert that isn't a ghost, and that makes you the only thing that can be easily killed. You notice that your own shadows are starting to play tricks on you. In the intense glare, the contrast between the white sand and the black shade is so sharp that your eyes struggle to adjust. When you look into a shadowed ravine, it looks like a bottomless pit of pure ink. The Bedouin use these pockets of void to launch sudden short-range ambushes. They wait in the absolute darkness of a cliff's shadow, and by the time your pupils dilate enough to see them, they have already released their spears and retreated back into the blinding light. You are fighting a war of constant pupil contraction and expansion, a physical strain that leads to a crushing lighthead dock by noon. The raiders also use the shimmer to distort their own numbers. This is a callback to the Fata Morgana we encountered earlier, but used on a smaller tactical scale. By riding in a single file through a thermal layer, they can make 5 riders look like an unbroken line of 50. You watch as your commander orders the archers to ready their bows, but as they aim, the line of enemies breaks apart, wobbles, and disappears into the air like smoke. You are wasting precious focus on phantoms. Every time you're ready for a fight that doesn't happen, your adrenaline crashes, leaving you more depleted than before. There's a quirky bit of sensory deprivation that occurs in the midday heat. The sound of the wind and the hiss of the sand create a white noise that, combined with the visual shimmer, puts you into a trance-like state. This is when the Bedouin shadows are most dangerous. You find yourself staring at a patch of vibrating air, convinced it's a city, while a raider has quietly moved into position to pick off the stragglers at the rear of your column. They are using the desert's own hypnotic qualities as a weapon. As the midday shimmer reaches its peak, the desert seems to go silent. The birds stop moving, the wind dies down, and there is only the vibrating heat. You feel like you are walking through a dream or a nightmare where the rules of physics have been suspended. The Bedouin are the only things that feel real, yet they are the things you can't quite catch with your eyes. You realize that you aren't being tracked by men. You are being tracked by the climate itself, and the men are just the blades it uses to finish the job. You take a drink of your warm, metal ichthysting water and try to wipe the ghosts from your vision. But they just reappear on the next ridge, shimmering and dancing in the light. They are waiting for the shadow to move, for the sun to tilt just enough to give them the next tactical opening. You are a prisoner of the light, and the shadows are closing in, even in the middle of a sun-drenched day. The shimmering horizon has promised you relief for hours. And finally, your scouts return with news that feels like a divine intervention. A lush, green oasis lies just beyond the next rise. You crest the dune, and for once, the mirage doesn't vanish. You see real date palms, their fronds a deep, defiant emerald against the tan of the waste. You see the glint of standing water. The entire Crusader column, usually a disciplined machine of iron and grit, begins to fracture as men break ranks and horses find a final frantic burst of speed. But as you reach the bank of the pool, the smell hits you first, a thick, cloying stench of rot and sulfur that stops you in your tracks. This is poisoning the mirage, a brutal environmental denial tactic that the Bedouin have perfected. In the center of the water lie the bloated carcasses of several camels, their hides split by the heat, turning the precious well into a toxic soup of bacteria and decay. This wasn't a random act of nature. The Bedouin have strategically spoiled this water source because they know it is the only one for 20 miles. Historians still argue whether the frequency of these scorched well tactics was a formal military directive or a localized survival instinct to prevent the invading Iron Men from establishing a permanent foothold. Regardless, the effect is catastrophic. You are standing next to thousands of gallons of water, and you are still dying of thirst. There is a quirky and particularly nasty fringe tidbit regarding how the Bedouin would ensure the water remained undrinkable for weeks. They wouldn't just use carcasses. They would often dump heavy loads of salt or specific desert shrubs, like the Nerium oleander, into the source. Oleander is highly toxic, and even a few branches can leach enough poison into a stagnant pool to cause heart failure, or severe cramping in anyone who drinks it. You watch a foot soldier, driven mad by thirst, scoop a handful of the tainted water to his lips. Within minutes, he is doubled over in agony. His humor is not just boiling, but curdling. The Bedouin are forcing you to make a choice. Die of thirst today, or die of dysentery and poisoning tomorrow. the mainstream historical fact that complicates your survival is the sheer density of your army. A small band of Bedouin can live off the moisture found in desert gourds, or the blood of their camels in an emergency. But an army of thousands requires a constant, massive throughput of water. By poisoning the nodes of your journey, the raiders are essentially hurting you. They are pushing you deeper into the Badlands, toward the more arid stretches where they have hidden caches of water that you will never find. They are using the oasis not as a resource, but as a trap of hope. You notice that the Bedouin raiders are watching you from the high ground above the oasis. They don't look thirsty. One of them casually pours a small amount of water from a leather skin onto the ground, a deliberate, agonizing insult. They are demonstrating their mastery of the supply chain. While you are staring at a poisoned well, they are likely tapping into a qanat, an ancient Persian-style underground tunnel that carries cool, clean water from distant mountains. There is a fringe theory that the Bedouin would actually build false oases, planting a few palms over a dry hole to lure Crusaders into these dead ends, while the real water remained miles away, camouflaged by the terrain. The psychological impact of the spoiled well is often more lethal than the thirst itself. You see the thousand-yard stare settling into the eyes of your comrades. When the mirage turns out to be real but unusable, the spirit breaks. You'll realize that the Saracen isn't just fighting you. He is fighting your future. He has looked at the map of your march and decided where you will perish. You find yourself looking at your own horse, wondering if you'll have to resort to the desperate measures you'd be heard, whispered in the camp, drinking the animal's blood or the fluid from its stomach. It's a quirky, dark reality of desert warfare that the noble knight is often reduced to the level of a scavenger within days. The raiders use this moment of despair to launch a psychological volley. They begin to sing a low, rhythmic chanting that carries perfectly across the stagnant water. You don't understand the words, but the tone is unmistakable. It's a funeral dirge. They are mourning you before you are even dead. You feel a surge of irrational anger, but you are too weak to climb the ridge to challenge them. Your armor feels heavier than ever, a burden of useless metal that can't protect you from the microscopic killers in the water. As the sun begins to set over the poisoned palms, the smell of the mirage lingers in your nostrils. The Bedouin vanish back into the dunes, knowing that they've successfully deleted one of your days. You have to move on, but your legs feel like they are made of dry wood. You are marching toward the next coordinate on your map, but you know that the raiders are already there, probably with another basket of salt and a dead camel. You realize that in this war, the holy water you seek is just plain, clean rain, and the desert is determined to keep it from you. You take one last look at the emerald leaves of the palms, a cruel joke played by the landscape and the men who rule it. The Bedouin didn't need to block your path with a wall of spears. They just needed to poison your dreams. You turn your back on the oasis and step back into the heat, the desert, laughing at your back with the sound of shifting sand. As you march away from the poisoned oasis, your gaze remains fixed on the ridgeline where the raiders hover. It isn't just their mobility that unnerves you, it's their composure. Through the narrow slit of your visor, you see what the common soldiers have begun to call the Saracen grin. It isn't necessarily a literal smile, but a perceived expression of terrifying, serene patience. To a knight of the West, war is a grand, explosive event, a clash of steel. A thundering charge, a decision made in a single afternoon. To the Bedouin, war is a season. It is a slow, methodical process of watching an intruder unravel. You are beginning to realize that the cultural gap between your heavyset chivalry and their light, predatory mindset is a weapon in itself. Historians still argue whether the perceived cruelty of the Bedouin tactics, the poisoning of wells, the refusal to engage in honorable face-to-face combat was a strategic necessity of asymmetric warfare or a deliberate psychological ploy to alienate and terrify the Crusaders. To you, it feels like a lack of rules. You were raised on stories of Roland and Charlemagne, where enemies met on the field and tested their mettle. Here, the enemy is a shadow that mocks your heavy equipment. The Saracen grin represents a mindset that views your chivalry as a form of thermal insanity. They aren't interested in your honor. They are interested in your metabolic collapse. A quirky fringe tidbit about this cultural friction involves the use of perfume and hygiene. Many Crusaders were horrified to find that Bedouin and Saracen warriors often wore rosewater or citrus oils into battle. To a knight who hasn't bathed in 3 months and smells of rusted iron and old sweat. The scent of flowers on a raiding party felt like a supernatural taunt. It signaled a level of comfort and surplus that you simply cannot fathom. It suggested that while you are fighting for your very life against the elements, they are comfortable enough to care about how they smell. This sensory superiority grinds away at your ego, making you feel like a clumsy barbarian in the face of a more refined, or at least more adapted, civilization. The mainstream historical fact of this era is the sheer difference in tactical patience. Your army is on a timer. You have limited supplies, a dwindling water reserve, and a feudal contract that might expire. The Bedouin are at home. They can wait for the sun to move 5 degrees. They can wait for the wind to shift. They can wait for your horse to take its last breath. This patience is a passive weapon. You find yourself making impulsive, dangerous decisions just to force an any ending to the tension. You want to charge a hill just so you can finally stop moving, even if it means dying at the top. The raiders know this, and they use the grin to keep you in that state of agitated desperation. There is a fringe theory that the Bedouin would intentionally use theatrical retreat to play on the European ego. They would feign a disorganized flight, leaving behind a few luxury items, a silk rug, a silver carafe, knowing that the hungry, thirsty Crusaders would break formation to scavenge. This wasn't just about the loot, it was about breaking the unity. Once a knight stops being part of a phalanx and starts being an individual looking for a prize, he is much easier to kill. You've seen it happen. A brother at arms wanders 50 yards to pick up a discarded scimitar, and before his hand even touches the hilt, a raider has appeared from the shimmer to cut him down. The Saracen grin also reflects a different relationship with the divine. You believe God is on your side and will grant you victory if you are faithful. The Bedouin believe that the desert is the expression of God's will, and to survive it is to be in His favor. When you pray for rain and none comes, it feels like a betrayal. When the Bedouins see the sun rise, it feels like a confirmation of their strength. You are fighting against the world. They are moving with it. This spiritual confidence allows them to stay calm while you are spiraling into heat-induced divine doubt. You notice that the raiders often engage in performative rest. They will sit in full view of your scouts, dismounted, drinking tea or eating dates, completely unbothered by your presence. It is a psychological masterstroke. They are showing you that they are not afraid of your invincible heavy cavalry. They are showing you that you are not even worth standing up for. You feel a surge of Nicham, a realization that your entire military identity, the heavy horse, the lance, the steel shell, is being rendered irrelevant by a man sitting on a carpet in the sand. There's a quirky bit of desert etiquette that you find baffling. Occasionally, after a skirmish, the Bedouin might leave a small skin of water or a bag of salt near a fallen Crusader they respected. It isn't an act of mercy, it's a warrior's tribute, a sign that you are a worthy sacrifice for the desert. It makes the horror of your situation feel curated, as if you were part of a ritual you didn't agree to join. The grin is the face of a priest conducting a sacrifice, and you are the lamb in a very expensive metal fleece. As the afternoon sun turns the world into a red haze, the Saracen grin seems to be everywhere. Every ripple in the sand and every shadow on a rock looks like a mocking face. You realize that you aren't just losing a war of logistics or steel, you are losing a war of temperaments. The Bedouin are the calm center of the storm, and you are the debris being tossed around by the wind. You take a final dry breath and try to steel your heart, but the patience of the desert is longer than the life of any man. As you trudge through the midday glare, you notice something peculiar on the distant ridges. It isn't the flash of a blade or the movement of a horse, but a rhythmic, blinding pulse of light, like a star has fallen to earth and is trying to speak. These are the communication in the shimmer signals, a sophisticated network of polished copper mirrors used by the Bedouin to coordinate their movements across vast distances. To your eyes, it's just more sundazzle, another reason to squint and curse. But to the raiders, those flashes are a detailed, tactical language. They are reporting your numbers, your speed, and most importantly, your water status. Two commanders who are miles ahead of your vanguard. Historians still argue whether the Bedouin used a formalized code similar to a medieval heliograph, or if the flashes were simpler pulse signals meant to trigger specific maneuvers. Regardless, the efficiency is terrifying. While your army relies on mounted messengers, vulnerable men on exhausted horses who must navigate treacherous dunes and risk ambush, the Bedouin are communicating at the speed of light. You see a flash to the north, answered seconds later by a pulse from the south. You are being discussed in a language of fire, and you have no way to intercept the message or even understand its intent. It's a quirky bit of high-tech, primitive warfare. They've effectively turned the sun into a telegraph. A fringe tidbit regarding these mirrored communications involves the use of colored smoke. Some accounts suggest that by adding specific dried minerals or desert plants to small, intense fires, the Bedouin could produce plumes of vibrant red or deep black smoke that stood out against the blue-white sky. These weren't just "we are here" markers, they were tactical payloads. A red plume might mean the vanguard is faltering, while black could signal the well is poisoned. You watch a thin ribbon of soot-colored smoke rise from a jagged peak and feel a chill that has nothing to do with the temperature. You are the subject of a conversation you cannot join, and the conclusion of that conversation is likely your demise. The mainstream historical fact of this signaling mastery is the invisible pincer. Because they can communicate instantly, the Bedouin don't need to stay together in a large, vulnerable mass. They can scatter into tiny cells, appearing to you as nothing more than a few lone scouts. But the moment your column enters a vulnerable wadi or a narrow pass, those mirrors flash, and within minutes, the cells have converged into a lethal strike force. It's a swarm doctrine that predates modern military theory by nearly a millennium. You feel like you are fighting a single giant organism that has eyes on every hilltop and a brain that lives in the wind. There is a fringe theory that the Bedouin actually used the mirage itself to hide their signals by positioning their mirrors at specific angles within the shimmer layer. They could ensure the flashes were only visible to someone standing at a specific elevation, like a scout on a distant mountain, while remaining completely invisible to you on the valley floor. You are literally walking through a web of data, a medieval internet of light, and you are the only one who doesn't have the password. You find yourself staring at the horizon, trying to find a pattern in the flickers, but the glare just burns your retinas until you are forced to look away. The raiders also use these signals for acoustic visual coordination. You hear a low, resonant drum beat, a tabble thudding from a nearby dune. It's a heavy, rhythmic sound that you can feel in your chest. Moments later, a mirror flashes. The drum sets the tempo for the march, and the light provides the direction. This allows the Bedouin to maintain perfect formation, even in the middle of a sandstorm or a chaotic night raid. You, meanwhile, are relying on shouted commands and silver trumpets. But in the howling wind and the clank of your own mail, those sounds are easily lost. You are a deaf and blind giant trying to catch a seeing fly. You notice a scout on a ridge holding something that catches the light. He isn't just signaling, he's tracking you with the reflection. He's bouncing a beam of sunlight directly into the eyes of your lead archers, making it impossible for them to aim at him. It's a clever bit of defensive signaling. He's using the tool of communication as a localized weapon. Every time your men try to focus on the ridge, they are met with a lightning strike of reflected sun. It's a quirky, frustrating reality. The very sky that is cooking you is also providing the ammunition for your enemies to keep you from fighting back. There's a fringe bit of desert lore that suggests the Bedouin could even signal at night using shield flashes of moonlight, though the accuracy of such claims is still debated among military historians. However, sitting in your camp at night, you see the stars seem to flicker in ways that don't feel natural. Is it the atmosphere? Or is it a scout with a piece of dark cloth chopping the light of a distant fire to send a message? The uncertainty is a toxin. You realize that you have no dark zones here. You are always under observation, always being read like a book. And the review is being sent via light beams to the very people who want you dead. As the section closes, you see a final long pulse of light from the deep desert. It feels like a period at the end of a sentence. You don't know what it said, but you see the raiders on your flanks suddenly wheel their horses and move toward a distant canyon. They are moving with purpose, while you are just moving. You realize that the shimmer isn't an obstacle for them. It's a canvas. You take a shaky breath, the air tasting of ozone and dust, and wonder what the next message will be for you. As the column plods forward, you begin to pass the skeletal remains of the vanguard men and horses who fell only hours ago. But the desert doesn't leave bodies as you know them. You notice that the fallen aren't just dead, they've been processed. The heavy mail hauberks have been unlaced and stripped, the leather straps sliced away, and the iron helmets gathered into neat piles or carried off. These are the armor scavengers. a specialized facet of Bedouin raiding where the heat is the primary killer and the raiders simply act as the cleanup crew. They don't need to risk a spear thrust when the sun will eventually unwrap the Iron Men for them. You realize with a jolt of horror that, to the Bedouin, you aren't just an enemy, you are a slow-moving shipment of high-quality European steel. Historians still argue whether the scarcity of iron in the deep desert made these scavenging runs a primary economic driver for the tribes, or if it was merely a tactical way to ensure the Crusaders could regroup. In the Levant, metal is a precious commodity, and your suit of armor represents a small fortune. You see a Bedouin rider in the distance, and you notice something haunting. He is wearing a piece of polished steel on his forearm that looks suspiciously like a Crusader's vambrace. They are rebranding your technology, stripping the heavy, useless parts and keeping the high-grade steel for their own knife blades and arrowheads. It's a quirky, practical recycling program where the input is your life. There is a fringe tidbit from contemporary chronicles suggesting that Bedouin raiders would sometimes use the discarded armor of fallen knights as heat lures. They would prop a suit of mail up on a wooden frame in a shimmering wadi, making it look like a knight standing guard. Your exhausted scouts, seeing the glint of steel, would charge in to rescue their comrade, only to find a hollow shell of iron and a rain of arrows from the surrounding ridges. You are literally being haunted by the ghosts of your own equipment. The armor you wear to save your life is being turned into a tool to end it. The mainstream historical fact of this scavenging warfare is the psychological weight it places on the survivors. Seeing your comrades stripped of their dignity and their protection before they are, even cold in the sand, is a brutal blow to the concept of chivalry. Back in Europe, a fallen knight would be guarded by his squires, his armor preserved as a family heirloom. Here, the armor scavengers treat your sacred gear like scrap metal. You feel a surge of equipment tanxitu, are terrified to let go of your shield, even as the weight of it threatens to snap your wrist. Because you know the moment it hits the sand, it belongs to the desert. You notice that the raiders are incredibly selective. They don't take everything. They leave the heavy, cumbersome greaves and the thick, sweat-soaked padding of the gambesons. They want the heightened-style steel of the swords and the fine links of the chainmail that can be melted down or reforged into lighter, more mobile weapons. There is a fringe theory that the Damascus steel so feared by the Crusaders was, in part, refined using the high-carbon scrap recovered from European battlefields. You are literally providing the raw materials for the blades that will be used against you in the next skirmish. It is a closed loop of iron and blood that you cannot escape. The scavengers also target your horse's tack. The heavy iron bits, the stirrups, and the horseshoe nails are all pulled from the carcasses. Without nails, your remaining horses cannot be reshod, and the abrasive sand begins to wear their hooves down to the sensitive quick within days. The Bedouin don't need to cut your horse's throat. They just need to wait for its shoes to fall off. You are being deconstructed bit by bit, a slow-motion dismantling of a military machine. You look at your own hands, the knuckles raw and the leather of your gauntlets cracking, and you feel less like a warrior and more like a collection of parts. There's a quirky bit of biological irony in the scavenging. The raiders often use the padded parts of your armor, the linen and wool layers, to create better insulation for their own waterskins, or to line their camel saddles. The very fabric that is currently causing you to overheat is being used by your enemies to stay cool. They are the ultimate efficiency experts, turning your liabilities into their assets. You see a raider riding away with a bundle of white surcoats, and you realize he's going to use them as cloths for his family's tent. Your holy mission is providing a better quality of life for the people you came to conquer. As the sun reaches that low, angry red of the late afternoon, you pass another cluster of stripped dead. The absence of the armor makes the bodies look small, fragile, and utterly out of place. Without the steel, they are just men who didn't belong in the sun. The Bedouin have moved on, their camels laden with the iron harvest of the day. You find yourself tightening the straps of your own breastplate, a futile gesture of possession. You are still the owner of your armor, for now, but you can feel the scavenger's eyes on your back, counting the links in your mail and waiting for the sun to finish the unboxing. You take a final, dry breath and push forward, the clink of your armor sounding less like a song of war and more like the rattling of a coin purse in the pocket of a thief. The armor scavengers are patient, and the desert is long. You realize that out here, the only thing more valuable than your life is the metal you're wrapped in. and the desert intends to keep both. As your boots crunch over the parched earth, a heavier weight than your mail begins to settle over your heart, a spiritual vertigo. Back in the damp green valleys of Europe, the theology of the Crusade seemed as solid as the stone of a cathedral. You were told that you were the army of God, that the elements themselves would bow to the righteous, and that the land of milk and honey was a lush paradise waiting to be reclaimed. But the reality you found is a landscape that is profoundly, terrifyingly indifferent. You are grappling with biblical zeal versus desert reality. A crisis of faith born of the fact that the sun shines just as brightly on the infidel as it does on the faithful. In fact, it seems to shine on them with a bit more mercy. Historians still argue whether the extreme environmental stress of the Crusades led to a rise in apocalyptic mysticism or a quiet, cynical secularism among the rank-and-file knights. You find yourself somewhere in the middle. You pray for a miracle, a sudden cloud, a hidden spring, a cool breeze, and you are met with a shimmering mirage of a city that doesn't exist. To your medieval mind, this isn't just bad weather. It's a theological problem. If God is with you, why is the very ground beneath your feet trying to swallow your horse? The Bedouin, meanwhile, move with a calm that suggests they are in perfect harmony with the divine. They don't pray for the desert to change. They have changed themselves to fit the desert. A quirky, fringe tidbit regarding this spiritual struggle is the reliquate phenomenon. Many knights carried fragments of the true cross, or the bones of saints in silver reliquaries, around their necks. In the midday sun, these silver boxes become searingly hot, burning the skin of the men who wear them. You've seen a knight pull a holy medallion from his chest, his skin blistered by the very object meant to protect his soul. It's a bitter irony that you can ignore. Your holy objects are physically hurting you, while the Bedouin carry only what is functional. You begin to wonder if the desert is a giant forge, designed not to test your faith, but to melt it down and see what's actually underneath. The mainstream historical fact of this psychological erosion is the miracle fatigue that set in during long desert marches. After days of seeing crosses in the sky that turned out to be sundogs and angelic voices that were just the wind in the canyons, the Crusaders became increasingly despondent. You notice that the men have stopped singing hymns. The silence of the column is only broken by the clanking of armor and the occasional groan of a dying horse. The Bedouin use this spiritual silence as their cue. They know that a man who has lost his sense of divine purpose is a man who is already halfway to surrender. They don't just attack your body, they attack the story you told yourself about why you are here. There is a fringe theory that the Bedouin actually used theological taunting during their raids. They would shout verses from the Quran that spoke of the sun as a sign of God's power, directly contrasting your belief that the sun was a burden to be endured. Whether or not you understand the Arabic, the tone is clear. They are the children of this light, and you are the intruders. You feel a surge of Crusader nagging suspicion that perhaps the Holy Land doesn't want to be saved by men who don't know how to live in it. The Bedouin aren't just defenders of a territory. They are the natural inhabitants of a reality you find alien and hostile. You notice that the raiders' movements have a ritualistic quality. They circle you like a hawk circles a dying rabbit, not out of malice, but as part of a natural order. This desert reality is a hard, cold teacher. You've learned that a well-placed piece of shade is worth more than 1,000 prayers, and that a sip of clean water is more holy than any splinter of wood from a distant cathedral. This shift in values is a quiet revolution. You are becoming less of a knight and more of a survivor, but in doing so, you are losing the very zeal that brought you across the sea. The Bedouin see this hollowing out of your spirit. They see the way you look at the sun not as a creation of God, but as an enemy to be feared. There's a quirky bit of desert penance that some of the more fanatical monks in your column suggest, that the heat is a purgatory meant to cleanse your sins before you reach Jerusalem. You look at them with a hollow, sun-scorched stare. If this is purgatory, it has a very efficient recycling program for armor and horses. You find yourself more interested in the Bedouin as penance, their ability to go without food for days and still ride with the grace of a falcon. You are realizing that their savagery, as your priests call it, is actually a highly disciplined form of asceticism that is much more effective than your own. As the sun begins to set, casting long, bloody shadows across the dunes. The zeal of the morning feels like a lifetime ago. You are still marching toward a holy city, but the holiness of the mission has been bleached white by the UV rays. The Bedouin are still there, silhouetted against the red sky, looking like the true guardians of the land. You realize that God's will might not be your victory, but simply the desert's continued existence. You take a final dry breath and try to remember the face of the Virgin Mary, but all you can see is the shimmering gold of the horizon. You realize that out here, the only truth is the one that keeps you breathing until the next dawn. The Bedouin have known this truth for 1,000 years, and they are watching you realize it, one parched mile at a time. The desert doesn't care about your theology, it only cares about your salt levels. You close your eyes and pray, not for victory, but for a single, cool shadow. The atmospheric weight of the desert reaches a crescendo as you find yourself reliving the tactical nightmare of the Horns of Hattin. This isn't just a battle you've heard of, it's the ultimate case study in how heat and thirst can be weaponized to dismantle a kingdom. You are part of a desperate, parched column of roughly 20,000 men marching toward Tiberias. The Bedouin raiders, serving under Saladin, have spent the last 24 hours ensuring you never reach the water of Lake Galilee. They have used the scorched earth policy in the most literal sense, setting fire to the dry grass and scrub brush upwind of your position. Now, you aren't just fighting the sun, you are fighting a wall of thick, choking smoke, and a heat so intense it feels like the air itself is catching fire. Historians still argue whether the Crusader leadership's decision to march away from the reliable wells of Safaria was a result of political infighting, or a total breakdown in environmental intelligence. To you, trapped in the center of the line, the why is irrelevant. The reality is that your tongue has swollen so much from thirst that you can no longer close your mouth. The Bedouin move through the smoke like demons of the forge. They don't engage your front, they circle the rear, where the foot soldiers are collapsing. They are using thermal exhaustion as a primary siege weapon. You watch as men drop their spears and fall to their knees, not to pray, but because their nervous systems have simply quit. A quirky and terrifying tidbit from the chronicles of this day involves the waterskin's psychological play. While your men were screaming for a drop of moisture, Saladin's forces reportedly brought up camel loads of water from the lake, only to pour it out into the sand in full view of your front lines. It was a masterclass in psychological demolition. The Bedouin raiders would ride close to your thirsty ranks, clinking metal cups and laughing. It's a level of cruelty that goes beyond the blade. They are killing your will to live before they ever bother to kill your body. You realize that the horns the twin peaks of an extinct volcano where your army is, making its final standar a natural oven, designed by geography to trap the rising heat. The mainstream historical fact of Hattin is that the true cross, the holiest relic of your world, was captured here. But it wasn't captured in a glorious charge. It was taken from a group of men who were too weak to lift it. The heat had turned the army of God into a collection of staggering ghosts. The Bedouin raiders utilized a specific maneuver here called the sand dance, where they would ride in tight circles to kick up even more dust and ash from the fires, making the air virtually unbreathable for your armored knights. You are breathing in the cremated remains of the landscape, and every cough feels like a sandpaper rasp against your throat. There is a fringe theory that the Bedouin actually used the thermal updrafts created by the brush fires to extend the range of their arrows. By firing into the rising hot air, their light composite bow shafts could theoretically sail over your defensive lines and strike the unprotected camp followers in the center. You see arrows falling from the sky like a rain of soot. Your heavy mail is useless against a weapon that you can't see through the smoke. You find yourself hiding behind your dead horse, the only shade left in a world of fire and ash. You notice that the raiders are remarkably coordinated for such a chaotic environment. They are using the smoke vials to rotate their forces. A fresh group of riders emerges from the gray haze, looses a volley, and then vanishes back into the smoke before your archers can even find the string. They are cycling their hydration and their energy while you are stuck in a stationary heat. This is the pinnacle of the Bedouin strategy, using the environment to create a kill box where the enemy does 90% of the work of dying through their own physiological struggle. There's a quirky bit of grim humor among the survivors. The Hattin tan men's faces are so caked with ash and dried sweat that they look like statues of gray clay. You look at your own hands and can't tell where the leather ends and your skin begins. The Bedouin, by contrast, look pristine. They stay upwind of the fires, their dark robes acting as a barrier against the floating embers. They are the audience to your extinction. You realize that the Kingdom of Jerusalem didn't fall to a sword. It fell to a 105-degree afternoon and a lack of water. As the sun begins to set on the horns of Hattin, the red light filtered through the smoke makes the world look like a literal hellscape. The Bedouin finally close in, but there is no battle left to fight. They are simply collecting the exhausted. You see the king of Jerusalem being led away, his iron majesty replaced by the shivering of a man in the throes of heatstroke. The raiders move with the efficiency of harvesters in a wheat field. You realize that this wasn't a war. It was a biological eviction. You take a final, gasping breath of the smoke-filled air and feel the heat of the volcano's rocks beneath you. The Bedouin have won not because they were braver, but because they were cooler. They understood the math of the sun, and you were the variable that didn't fit. As the darkness finally falls, the fires still burn, a flickering monument to the day the desert swallowed the West. As the dust of the Hattin disaster lingers in your mind, you find yourself observing the stark clinical difference between the survivors in the Crusader camp. The wounded are treated with a desperate, misguided brutality. Your physicians, mostly monks or barbers, are obsessed with the theory of the four humors. They see a knight suffering from exhaustion fever and conclude his blood is angry. They apply leeches or open a vein with a rusty lancet, effectively draining the last of the fluid that his heart needs to function. This is the medicine of the sands, or rather, the lack of it. You are watching men who survived the Saracen arrows die at the hands of their own doctors, victims of a European medical tradition that is fundamentally incompatible with a 110-degree environment. The Bedouin, by contrast, possess a sophisticated, practical pharmacopoeia that feels like sorcery to you. While your healers are praying over a man with boiling bile, the raiders are using the desert's own flora to regulate their physiology. Historians still argue whether the Islamic world's lead in medicine during the Crusades was due to their preservation of Greek texts or their direct nomadic experience with botanical chemistry. You see a Bedouin captive being allowed to treat his own wounds. He uses a paste made of crushed aloe vera to cool a burn and a concoction of willow barca, precursor to modern aspirin to manage a fever. They aren't just surviving the heat, they are chemically mitigating its effects on the human body. A quirky fringe tidbit about desert medicine involves the use of clay cooling. You notice that Bedouin riders often smear a specific type of moist, mineral-rich mud on their foreheads and the back of their necks during the hottest hours. To you, it looks like a pagan ritual, but it's actually a brilliant use of evaporative cooling. As the water in the clay evaporates, it pulls heat away from the major blood vessels leading to the brain, acting as a primitive external radiator. You, meanwhile, are trapped in a metal helmet that is doing the exact opposite, retaining the heat of your head like a lidded pot. You're suffering from a constant low-grade concussion caused by cerebral swelling, while the raider is literally keeping a cool head. The mainstream historical fact of this era is the establishment of the Knights Hospitaller, who eventually began to adopt some of the superior local medical practices. However, for the average knight in the field, this knowledge is still decades away. You are currently dealing with desert sores, small nicks from the salt and sand that quickly turn into weeping. Gangrenous ulcers, because your diet of salted pork and hardtack has left you with early-stage scurvy. The Bedouin don't have this problem. They consume desert truffles, dates, and fresh camel milk, providing a steady stream of vitamins that keep their immune systems robust. You are a biological wreck, rotting from the inside out because you brought a European diet to a Levanten war. There is a fringe theory that the Bedouin raiders would sometimes use narcotic warfare. Some accounts suggest they would leave small amounts of tainted wine or water near abandoned camps, liquid infused with henbane or mandrake. A thirsty crusader wouldn't hesitate to drink it, and within an hour he would be wandering into the dunes in a state of vivid hallucination, easily picked off or left to the sun. You've seen men laughing and dancing as they walk toward a cliff edge, their spirits seemingly lifted while their bodies are being led to the slaughter. It's another layer of the weaponized environment where even the medicine can be a poison. You notice a peculiar behavior among the raiders. They breathe almost exclusively through their noses, often covering their mouths with a fold of their headcloth. It's a quirky bit of respiratory medicine. By breathing through the nose, they moisten the dry air before it hits their lungs, and prevent the massive moisture loss that comes with mouth breathing. You, panting like a dog under the weight of your armor, are essentially blow-drying your internal organs. Every gasp for air is a withdrawal from your body's water bank. The Bedouin move in a state of meditative breathing, a physical discipline that keeps their heart rate low and their hydration high. The Saracen healers also understand the value of salt not as a burden on the skin, but as a necessity for the blood. While you are trying to wash the salt away, they are consuming small amounts of it with their water to prevent water intoxication or hyponatremia. They know that drinking too much pure water without salt can be as lethal as drinking none at all. You see a comrade who has drank an entire gallon of well water suddenly collapse in a seizure. Your doctors call it a demonic fit, but the Bedouin know his salt levels have simply bottomed out. They are the chemists of the dune, and you are the unfortunate test subject. As the section closes, you find yourself staring at a Bedouin prisoner who is calmly chewing on a piece of licorice root to soothe his throat. He looks at your cracked, bleeding lips with a gaze that is more pitying than hateful. He knows that his medicine is part of his armor, a shield that exists inside his veins. You realize that you aren't just outfought, you are out-hot on a cellular level. The desert is a laboratory, and the Bedouin are the only ones who have read the safety manual. You take a shaky breath, the dry air scratching your throat once again, and realize that your faith in European science is as hollow as your empty canteen. The Bedouin are moving again, their bodies maintained by 1,000 years of desert wisdom, while you are just a man waiting for a miracle that your own medicine is currently preventing. The midday glare has reached its most disorienting pitch, and you find yourself squinting at the horizon, where a massive, roiling cloud of dust has begun to rise. It's thick, tan, and stretches for nearly a mile across the desert floor. Your scouts, panicked and panting, rush back to the main column with a terrifying report. A massive relief army is approaching from the east, a force of thousands that will surely crush your exhausted vanguard. Your commander immediately halts the march, ordering the men to form a defensive square and brace for the impact. But as you sit there, the metal of your armor absorbing the relentless heat, you notice something strange. The cloud doesn't move with the rhythmic thud of a marching host. It seems to hover, swirling in place. This is the mirage of the reinforcements, a classic Bedouin ruse that uses your own fear as a magnifying glass. In reality, that army consists of exactly 6 Bedouin raiders. They have spent the last hour riding in circles, dragging heavy bundles of brush and palm fronds behind their camels, in the superheated, unstable air of the desert floor. The dust they kick up is caught in thermal updrafts, making it look 10 times larger and more dense than it actually is. Historians still argue whether this dust-dragging technique was an intentional imitation of the biblical pillars of cloud, or simply a practical use of local physics to delay an enemy. For you, the result is the same. You have wasted 2 hours of cool travel time preparing to fight a phantom, while the sun continues to boil the life out of your soldiers. A quirky, fringe tidbit about this ruse is the camel pace coordination. To make the dust cloud look like it's being generated by a moving army, the raiders have to synchronize their speed with the wind. If they move too fast, the cloud disperses. Too slow, and it settles. They are essentially performing a piece of largescal environmental theater. While you are praying for the strength to survive the coming charge, the raiders are likely laughing, stopping occasionally to drink from their well-hidden water skins while they wait for you to tire yourselves out in the heat. They aren't just wasting your time, they are wasting your metabolic fuel. The mainstream historical fact that makes this ruse so effective is the information gap. In the 12th century, you have no aerial reconnaissance, no way to see over the next dune. You are entirely dependent on what your eyes tell you, and your eyes are being lied to by the atmosphere. You've been conditioned to associate dust with danger, and the Bedouin have turned that instinct into a leash. Every time you stop to form a battle line, your internal body temperature spikes because the air isn't moving over your armor anymore. You are essentially a stationary heat sink, absorbing the sun's radiation while the army on the horizon remains a harmless collection of sticks and sand. There is a fringe theory that the Bedouin would actually time these dust cloud ruses to coincide with your noonday prayer or meal times. They knew that the psychological blow of a new threat is greatest when a soldier is trying to rest. You've just sat down, perhaps loosened a single strap of your breastplate, only to be forced back into the sun by the sight of that fake army. It's a form of sleep deprivation, Bray. They are making the landscape do the work of 1,000 soldiers, forcing you to remain combut-ready until your heart begins to flutter from the strain. You notice that your horse is reacting to the phantom army as well. The animal can sense your tension, and its own heart rate climbs, burning through its precious water reserves even faster. The Bedouin ghost is essentially a biological weapon that targets the central nervous system of your entire unit. You find yourself staring at the cloud, waiting for the first glint of a spear, but nothing ever emerges. The reinforcements stay exactly where they are, shimmering, tan wall of nothingness that mocks your heavy broadsword and your iron resolve. There's a quirky bit of tactical irony here. The more disciplined your army is, the more effective the ruse becomes. A disorganized rabble might have just kept walking. But because you are a professional force that follows a strict defensive doctrine, you are obligated to stop and react. The Bedouin are using your own military training against you. They are turning your order into a trap of stagnation. You realize that the primitive raider has a much deeper understanding of the physics of fear than any general in Europe. As the afternoon sun finally begins to pull the shadows long, the dust cloud slowly dissipates. The wind has shifted, and the ruse is over. You look out at the empty desert where the army once stood, and you feel a hollow, burning shame. There was no one there. You've spent the most dangerous hours of the day standing still in a metal oven, waiting for a fight that was never coming. The Bedouin have vanished back into the dunes, having successfully stolen your afternoon without firing a single shot. You take a final dry breath, your throat feeling like it's been lined with the very dust you were so afraid of. You realize that out here, the most dangerous enemy is Unt, the one who charges you with a sword the one who makes you stand still until you die of your own heat. The march continues, but the mirage of the reinforcements has left a permanent mark on your spirit. You don't trust the horizon anymore. And in the desert, a man who doesn't trust his eyes is a man who is already lost. As the sun begins its final heavy descent toward the horizon, your mind starts to fracture in ways that have nothing to do with the Saracen grin or the armor scavengers. You have entered the realm of thirst-induced hallucinations. The desert is no longer just a physical landscape. It has become a canvas for your brain's desperate malfunctioning attempts to find a way out. You look toward a cluster of jagged red rock formations a mile to your north, and your eyes swear they see a massive Gothic cathedral, complete with stained glass and the cool gray shadows of a stone nave. You can almost hear the low resonant hum of a Gregorian chant. You take a step toward it, but the cathedral ripples, its spires elongating and then collapsing back into the wind-worn basalt. You are experiencing the ultimate psychological weapon of the waste, the betrayal of your own consciousness. Historians still argue whether the high rate of desert madness among the Crusaders was caused primarily by the hypersalinity of the Chat regions or by the sheer cognitive load of processing a landscape that looks like a liquid. In the 12th century, there is no language for cerebral edema or electrolyte net psychosis. To you, these are literal visions, either divine tests or diabolical traps. You see a woman in a blue robe standing by a well that doesn't exist. You see a feast laid out on a silk carpet that turns into a patch of dry scrub as you approach. The Bedouin know this delirium threshold intimately. They do not need to ambush a man who is currently trying to hold a conversation with a rock he believes is his long-dead brother. A quirky fringe tidbit about these hallucinations involves the singing sand. In certain parts of the Levant, the friction of sand grains sliding down a dune creates a low-frequency hum that can sound remarkably like human voices or distant trumpets. To a knight whose brain is already redlining from heat, this acoustic phenomenon becomes a detailed auditory hallucination. You find yourself answering commands that were never given, turning your horse to face a charge that is just the wind vibrating through a canyon. The Bedouin use this to their advantage, occasionally mimicking these low hums with their own throats or instruments to lure strays away from the safety of the main column. The mainstream historical fact of this psychological breakdown is the loss of command. When the knights begin to hallucinate, the chain of command, the only thing keeping the army from becoming a mob, dissolves. You see a Surgeon Tatarms suddenly drop his shield and start digging frantically in the sand, claiming he can smell the ocean. No amount of shouting or physical correction can bring him back. He is a prisoner of his own internal mirage. The Bedouin raiders watch these breakoffs with clinical interest. They don't intervene. They know that a man who has lost his grip on reality will eventually wander into a terrain trap or simply sit down and wait for the angels to take him. There is a fringe theory that the Bedouin actually used settlers to trigger these hallucinations. By burning specific resins or incense upwind of your camp, they could introduce a familiar, comforting smell, like the incense of a church or the smell of roasting meat, into your sensory-deprived environment. This olfactory ghosting can cause a starving, thirsty man to lose all sense of self-preservation. You find yourself smelling your mother's kitchen in the middle of a salt flat, a sensory mismatch that causes a literal short circuit in your logic. You start walking toward the smell, leaving your water skin and your sword behind, and the Bedouin are there to meet you in the silence. You notice that the hallucination castle on the horizon is actually a result of atmospheric refraction, where the dense hot air near the ground acts as a lens, magnifying distant pebbles or shrubs into massive structures. This is a callback to the Fata Morgana, but on a deeply personal cognitive level. Your brain is trying to fill in the blanks of a monotonous, hostile environment with the imagery of home. You see the green hills of Normandy in a patch of gray lichen. You see the silver of a French river in the glint of a salt crust. It's a biological mercy that the desert turns into a trap, as the comfort of the hallucination makes you stop fighting the heat. There's a quirky bit of grim reality regarding the thirst dreams. When you do manage to fall into a shallow, fitful sleep, you don't dream of glory or women. You dream of the color blue. You dream of the sensation of cold rain hitting your tongue. When you wake up, the contrast between the dream and the 110-degree reality is so sharp, it feels like a physical blow to the chest. The Bedouin, who are used to the sensory minimalism of the desert, don't suffer from this hallucinatory rebound. They see the rock as a rock and the heat as the heat. Their mental operating system is built for this void, while yours is trying to run Europe, EHA, in a hardware environment that can't support it. As the castles in the sand begin to glow with the orange light of the setting sun, they look more real than ever. You find yourself wanting to go to them to give in to the sweet dreams the desert is offering. But you see a Bedouin rider pass through the center of your castle, his silhouette breaking the illusion and reminding you that you are standing in a graveyard of light. You take a final dry breath and blink the angels from your eyes, but they'll be back the moment you close them. The sun has finally begun to bleed into the horizon, but the relief you expected is replaced by a new, vertical challenge. You are facing the final ascent. A desperate scramble up a series of limestone ridges to reach the high ground before the light fails completely. Your commander believes the plateau will offer a cooler breeze and a better defensive position against the ghosts that have haunted your flanks all day. But as you urge your horse up the steep, crumbling path, you realize the Bedouin have once again turned the laws of nature into a tactical noose. They aren't just waiting for you at the top. They are using the very air you breathe to mask their presence. In the late afternoon, the rocky face of the ridge acts as a giant solar collector. The air heats up against the stone. It creates powerful thermal updrafts and visible rivers of rising warmth that flow from the valley floor to the peaks. The Bedouin raiders have positioned themselves and their mounts on the windward side of these currents. Historians still argue whether the raiders' mastery of thermal masking was a conscious application of falconry techniques, or a lived understanding of scent drift. To you, it means your greatest early warning system, your hounds, and your horse's keen sense of smell has been neutralized. The updrafts carry your scent up to them, giving them your exact position, while their scent is carried high into the sky, far above your nose. You are climbing blindly into a predator's mouth. A quirky fringe tidbit about this ascent involves the limestone blindness. As the sun hits the Whittagree rock at a low angle, the glare is reflected with a polarized intensity that can cause temporary snow blindness even in the absence of snow. You are trying to find footing for your horse on a path that looks like a sheet of pure, vibrating silver. You can see the cracks in the stone or the loose scree until your horse as hoof slips, sending a shower of sparks and rocks into the abyss below. The Bedouin, meanwhile, are using the shadow pockets of the high crags to watch you struggle. They are thermal voyeurs, perfectly aware of your fatigue, while remaining entirely invisible in the glare. The mainstream historical fact of these high-ground skirmishes is the asymmetry of gravity. A knight in 60 pounds of mail is a formidable force on a flat field, but on a 30-degree incline, you are a liability to yourself. Every step requires a massive expenditure of anaerobic energy, causing your core temperature to spike even as the ambient air begins to cool. The Bedouin raiders utilize gravity-assisted volleys, releasing their arrows from the heights. These shafts gain kinetic energy as they fall, allowing them to pierce mail that would normally be impenetrable at that range. You are being shot from the sky by men who haven't even broken a sweat. There is a fringe theory that the Bedouin actually used Hitchhimer lures on these ridges. By placing polished copper plates or small fires at the base of a false path, they could create a localized heat haze that made a sheer cliff look like a gradual slope through the distortion of the air. You've seen a knight in the vanguard attempt to lead his unit up what looked like a traversable ramp, only to have the entire group slide backward as the path dissolved into a vertical drop. It's a weaponization of the landscape that turns your own momentum into a killing force. You find yourself gripping the pommel of your saddle with hands that are shaking from altitude tremor, a byproduct of sudden exertion and low oxygen. You notice that the raiders on the ridge are staying perfectly still, mimicking the jagged silhouettes of the limestone pillars. This static camouflage is incredibly effective during the golden hour when the shadows are long and the human eye struggles with high contrast edges. You find yourself shouting at rocks, convinced they are warriors, while the actual warriors are standing 10 feet away, waiting for you to pass so they can strike from the rear. They are the kings of the crag, and you are just a heavy, iron-bound intruder trying to defy the gravity of the east. There's a quirky bit of equine physics at play here. Your horse's center of gravity is too high for this terrain. These animals were bred for the flat plains of Flanders, not the goat paths of the Levant. You feel the animal's hindquarters bunch and quiver with every lunge upward, and you know it's only a matter of time before its piston muscles give out. The Bedouins' Arabian horses, with their shorter backs and more flexible hocks, are essentially climbing the ridge like cats. They have been sculpted by this terrain over millennia. As you finally reach the crest of the first ridge, gasping for air that tastes like hot stone and dry dust, you look back at the valley. The updrafts are still humming, a low whistling sound in the rocks that seems to laugh at your effort. The Bedouin haven't engaged you in a final stand at the top. They have simply moved to the next ridge, 300 yards away, and loosed a single mocking arrow into the air. They have forced you to spend your last reserves of strength on a climb that led nowhere. You realize that the final ascent was just another chapter in the desert's long-form execution of your spirit. The long, agonizing march is nearing its end, and as you stand atop the final ridge, looking down at the scattered iron of your broken host, you begin to grasp the legacy of thermal warfare. This wasn't just a series of unfortunate skirmishes. It was a fundamental clash between two different philosophies of existence. You were a knight of the static West, a man who believed that power was built from stone and iron and that the environment was something to be paved over or ignored. The Bedouin, however, were the masters of fluid engagement. They didn't see the heat, the mirage, or the dust as obstacles. They saw them as force multipliers. You are currently living through a historical pivot point where the invincible armored cavalry of Europe was systematically dismantled by the very air it tried to conquer. Historians still argue whether the Bedouin tactics directly influenced the later military doctrines of asymmetric warfare, or if they were simply a localized phenomenon that the West eventually forgot. But as you look at your own cracked, salt-stained gauntlets, you know the truth is more visceral. The Bedouin taught the world that a lighter, more mobile force, one that understands the biology of the battlefield, can defeat a technologically superior foe simply by refusing to fight on the foe's terms. They weaponized the non-combat hours of the day. They turned the sun into a siege engine and the wind into a smokescreen. This is the thermal doctrine that would later reappear in the desert campaigns of the 20th century. From Lawrence of Arabia to the modern mechanized sweeps of the Sahara. A quirky fringe tidbit regarding this legacy involves the thermal memory of the armor itself. Long after the Crusades ended, the lessons learned in the Levant led to a revolution in European armor design. The move toward fluted plate armor in the late Middle Ages wasn't just for deflecting blades. It was an attempt to increase the surface area of the steel to help with radiative cooling, a direct response to the metal coffin. Experiences of the knights in the East, you are part of a painful high-stakes experiment in human engineering. The very shape of the future's iron was forged in the heat of your failure here. The mainstream historical fact that remains is the total collapse of the Crusader kingdom of dust following the loss of environmental control. When you lost the ability to reach water, you lost the ability to govern. The Bedouin didn't need to capture your cities, they just needed to wait for the climate to render them uninhabitable for men and male. You notice that the raiders on the horizon aren't pursuing you anymore. They don't have to, they've already won the war of the calories. You have spent more energy trying to stay cool than they have spent trying to kill you. It is a victory of efficiency over raw power. a lesson that military theorists would study for the next 800 years. There is a fringe theory that the mirage craft of the Bedouin was actually documented by early Arab scientists and later translated into Latin, influencing the Western understanding of optics and perspective. You find it a bitter irony that the very shimmering visions that drove you mad might one day help your descendants understand the world more clearly. Right now, though, you just want the world to stop shimmering. You feel a sense of thermal PTSD, a deep, instinctive fear of the open sun and the sound of dry wind. You've learned that the most lethal weapon in the world isn't made of steel. It's made of 115-degree air and a lack of salt. The raiders have left a legacy of environmental dominance. They proved that the desert is onto no man's land as a home for those who know how to speak its language. You look down at your horse, which is now just a staggering skeleton of its former self, and you realize that your superior European technology was actually a set of handcuffs. The Bedouins' primitive robes and camels were the true high-tech gear of the 12th century. They were the ones who were connected to the energy of the landscape. While you were insulated from it by 60 pounds of increasingly hot iron, there's a quirky bit of cultural irony in the way the stories of this war will be told. Back in Europe, they will speak of your heroic endurance and the treachery of the Saracen. They will focus on the swords and the shields, but you will always remember the sound of the ghost hooves in the night and the taste of the poisoned well. You will remember the Saracen grin and the way the sun felt like it was trying to reach inside your chest and pull the moisture out of your heart. The legacy of this warfare is the realization that the earth itself has an opinion on who should own it, and right now, the earth is siding with the Bedouin. As the section closes, you see the raiders vanish into the lengthening shadows of the plateau. They are fading into the legacy they've created, becoming one with the dunes and the heat. You are left standing in the cooling air, a monument to a way of war that the desert has officially retired. You take a final deep breath, the air finally losing its bite, and prepare for the last stretch of the journey, knowing that the shimmer will always be waiting for you in your dreams. The sun has finally touched the edge of the world, dissolving into a pool of deep violet and bruised gold. You are witnessing the sunset over the kingdom of dust, the closing act of a journey that has stripped you of your armor, your horse, and your illusions of European dominance. As the long, cooling shadows stretch across the dunes, the desert finally breathes. You are standing on the edge of the plateau, looking down at the path you've walked, a jagged line of discarded shields and the white bones of the vanguard already being claimed by the shifting silt. The Bedouin raiders have completely vanished, as if they were never made of flesh and blood at all, but were merely manifestations of the heat itself. They have retreated into the deep waste, leaving you to reckon with the silence of a land that has officially rejected your presence. Historians still argue whether the ultimate failure of the Crusader states was inevitable due to this environmental mismatch, or if a more radical adaptation, adopting the Bedouin-esque fluid lifestyle, could have saved the Kingdom of Jerusalem. You, however, are past the point of strategic theory. You are experiencing the metabolic peace that comes with the end of the day. Your core temperature is finally dropping, and the frantic thumping in your temples has slowed to a dull, rhythmic ache. You look at your hands, and the skin is the color of old parchment, permanently etched with the salt of the Levant. You have been fired in the desert's kill, and while you survived, you are no longer the man who stepped off the galley at Acre. You are a citizen of the Shimmer now, whether you like it or not. A quirky final tidbit of this journey involves the sandglass effect. In some areas where the lightning of a rare desert storm has struck the dunes, the intense heat flash creates fulgurites, hollow tubes of glass formed from fused silica. You find one near your feet, a fragile, twisted branch of frozen light. It's a perfect metaphor for your time here, a sudden, violent encounter between the sky and the earth that left something beautiful but broken behind. You tuck the glass shard into your belt, the only trophy you've won from a war that cost you everything else. The Bedouin left it there, perhaps as a final silent comment on the permanence of the desert versus the transience of your steel. The mainstream historical fact of the matter is that the Levant would remain under the control of the masters of the heat for centuries to come. The heavy cavalry of the West would return in various forms. But they would never again underestimate the power of the Mirage. You realize that the Kingdom of Dust wasn't a territory to be conquered. It was a state of being. The Bedouin didn't defeat you with superior numbers or better steel. They defeated you by being more human in a place that tries to erase humanity. They understood that to live here, you must be like the wind present but ungraspable, hot but ever-moving. As the last sliver of the sun disappears, the first stars begin to punch through the deepening blue. They are brighter than any stars you saw in the damp, hazy skies of Europe. They feel close enough to touch a ceiling of diamonds over a floor of ash. You feel a strange, detached sense of gratitude for the night. The false promises of the previous evening have been replaced by a genuine, cool stillness. You are no longer a knight, a crusader, or a noble. You are just a living thing that has successfully navigated the furnace. You take a final deep breath, and for the first time in days, the air doesn't burn your lungs. It tastes of cold stone and the infinite space between the worlds. The desert has won, but in winning, it has allowed you to remain. You look back one last time, toward the horns and the chott, the mirages and the smoke vials, and you realize that you will never truly leave this place. A piece of your soul is now part of the shimmer, a permanent ghost in the heathas. The Bedouin are out there somewhere in the dark, resting with their camels, waiting for the sun to rise and start the cycle again. But for tonight, the war is over. The iron men have melted, and only the dust remains. The world is finally growing quiet now. The heat that pressed against your chest all day has drifted away into the vast, dark canopy of the desert sky, leaving behind a stillness so profound you can almost hear the sand cooling. You can let go of the reins now. The horse is at rest, and the ghost hooves have faded into the whispers of the night wind. Feel the heavy weight of the mail lift from your shoulders, replaced by the soft, cool touch of the evening air as it settles over the dunes like a velvet blanket. Your breathing is slow, steady, and deep, drawing in the peace of a landscape that no longer demands anything from you. The horizon has stopped shimmering, the mirages have gone to sleep, and the stars above are watching over the quiet kingdom you've left behind. Everything is still, everything is calm. You are safe in the shadows of the dunes, and the journey is complete. Sleep now, while the desert dreams of rain.